morning, everyone, and welcome to the Metro Board activities on September 22nd, 2022. To start off today, I'd like to ask staff to provide us with our safety contact. Ms. Empezado is out today, so Assistant Chief Safety Officer Jim Wojciechowski will be doing the honors. Good morning, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When facing the front of the room, the exits are directly to your right. We do not have any tests of the fire alarm system scheduled for today. So if we do experience a fire alarm, we will go through the exit, gather in the lobby, and await further instructions. The security staff at the front desk will coordinate the required emergency response. There is an AED and fire extinguisher located on this floor in the lobby. In the event of a medical emergency, I will retrieve the AED and coordinate with our security staff to notify the first responders. All other security matters will be addressed by the security staff at the front desk in the lobby. Today's safety contact medical emergencies do occur in our metro system. If you see someone experiencing a medical emergency, always call 911 immediately and then notify the bus operator, the train operator, or the station manager as applicable. When using Metro Rail, there are call boxes mounted on the pylons on each platform that will allow you to notify the station manager. There are also call boxes located at the end of the rail car that will allow you to notify the train operator. If needed, all Metro stations.
Yes, that's what it is. Okay.
For additional information, please review the rider guide available at lamar.com.
You gotta move.
Since this is our first public meeting of the day, I'll ask the board corporate secretary to call the roll.
Smedberg, Vice Chair Baker.
Neither can I. I gotta see.
Director Letourneau.
You're on mute.
Dr. Lowe. Present. Director Drummer.
Present.
And Director Mark Proctor. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Does anyone have any objections from the committee?
Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Now to the approval of minutes. We have minutes of our July 28th, 2022 meeting and the executive session before us for approval. Are there any objections or changes, comments to those sets of minutes? Okay. Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. We have two items on our agenda this morning. First is to accept a report from the Inspector General and to authorize its posting on the IG's website. The second item is a presentation from staff on Metro's bus network redesign project, which will have its public kickoff next month. This project is one of the first major recommendations from the bus transformation project, which was endorsed by the board in 2020. My colleagues and I are extremely excited to be moving forward to the next phase of this project. Now we'll move on to the first item of business, acceptance of the IG report. Under the bylaws, the Executive Committee is responsible for reviewing and accepting the reports of the Inspector General. The committee is going to review the report. Before we take a vote, Mr. Fable, would you like to provide the committee with any highlights from this report? Good morning.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Directors. I'm pleased to represent the 30th semi-annual report representing our work for the period of January 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2020. This report provides all the outstanding work OIG staff has accomplished. Our investigative work resulted in 1 criminal indictment, 4 reports of investigation, 1 management alert, 1 management assistance report, and 1 special project report. OIG audit work resulted in the issuance of 25 contract audits, 1 Buy America audit, 2 program audits, and 1 management alert. OIG audit work led to the identification of $12.3 million in total possible savings. In addition, we also oversaw 2 financial audits. I want to thank OIG staff and WMATA management for their cooperation in our audit investigative work, and I'll gladly take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Do any of the committee members have any questions or comments? Any board members, questions or comments? Well, we really do appreciate these reports, and I think what's most interesting is not only the scope, but also the cooperation that you and WMATA staff have to really address the issues that you've brought forward to us in a timely fashion. So
Thank you.
really appreciate that cooperation. I see Liz is also here, so the two together, this is really important. Okay, acceptance of this report constitutes the board's authorization to post it on the Inspector General's website, provided that the IG has conferred with the General Counsel and confirmed that any private or confidential information has been removed and or redacted in accordance with applicable law and WMATA policy. I would like to move approval of this item. Is there a second from the committee member? Seconded by Ms. Klein. Any final comments or questions? Hearing none, now I'll ask Ms. Ellison to call the vote.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Ms. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. The report has been accepted and the Inspector General has been authorized to post it online. Now we'll turn to Ms. Davis and Mr. Calafere for their presentation on the bus network redesign project. Good morning. Tom, are you going to key this one up? Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Tom Webster, Strategy Planning and Program Management. We are also very excited to be here this morning kicking off the Better Bus program and the bus network redesign effort, which will build a better bus network for customers and the region, driven by customer input, data, and our bus service goals and guidelines. Metro's team is fully engaged in this effort, from the GM and senior executive team to our offices and departments across the agency. We know that a successful outcome will rely heavily on extensive engagement with our customers, with potential customers, our partners across the region, elected officials, and many others. And we also know that having shared guiding principles will help ensure that we're moving together in the same direction, especially when tough issues arise over the course of the effort. We look forward to the board's discussion and adoption of those guiding principles. I'll now turn it over to Allison Davis, our Vice President of Planning, and Peter Caffiero, our Managing Director of Intermodal Planning, who are leading the network redesign effort. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I will say it for the third time, but we are so excited to be starting this effort. And, on behalf of Metro and my colleagues and the project team, we're just thrilled to be here and finally talking to you about it. This is also the launch of the Better Bus brand, which you'll start to see rolling out when we talk about more about zero emission buses, bus priority, and all of that. But this is kind of that first step. And then finally, we'll be seeking your approval on those guiding principles, which will really help us as we get down into more of the details and redesigning that network. That will help us really set the path forward for that. So the bus network redesign was one of the key initiatives from the bus transformation project. The board adopted and endorsed the strategy in January of 2020. And that really set forward a bold vision for bus to be the mode of choice on the region's roads by 2030. But it also had a compendium of recommendations, 26 to be exact, which we're moving forward on in different ways. But this was kind of that big hallmark initiative that came out of it. So when we think about who rides the bus, a lot of times you'll see these percentages about low income and persons of color and all of that, and it's often compared to rail. But it's even more stark when we talk about in comparison to the region who is riding our bus. So if you think about our bus customers are 10 times more likely to be low income compared to the region. They are 50% more likely to be persons of color and 5 times more likely to be living without a car. So it's just really highlighting how important bus is to many people in this region and many of our most vulnerable residents. And bar none, every time we go out and survey customers, whether across the region, regardless of where they live in the region, regardless of how frequently they ride the bus, and across all demographics and income levels, they are asking for three things: more frequent service, more reliable and faster service, and more direct, better connectivity. And that is really when we ask about where to invest our resources, these are the three things that come up time and time again. And this was a survey that we did out of bus transformation, so it's pre-pandemic, but we've seen it throughout the pandemic as well as part of our customer research and customer engagement. So of all of those initiatives and recommendations that came out of bus transformation, many of them, which the board passed in various ways, the full transfer discount that went permanent this fiscal year, the service guidelines that were adopted in December of 2020, the bus priority capital program that started in 2020. These are all things that are really going to help form the basis for a lot of the work that we're going to be doing. And so those all feed into the redesign. And then also just making sure that it's understood that there are concurrent initiatives happening as well. Obviously, the Zero Emissions Bus Program, which you're all pretty familiar with, will be launching violation detection with the district to make sure that the red bus lanes are actually for buses, and then working on bus stops and amenities. So again, all of that feeds into and is working in parallel with the network redesign.
Thank you, Ellison, and I'll make it an even four to say I'm really excited, as is my staff, on this project in my service planning and scheduling staff. Really looking forward to improving the bus network. The focus of what we'll be doing, there are a lot of things that are general components of a network redesign. As Ellison mentioned, we'll focus on improving frequent service and building on our frequent service network, maximizing our use of bus priority infrastructure that we have been working with the jurisdictions to expand. Of course, looking at development patterns and other things that might warrant changes to our existing network. All of that needs to be coupled with looking at the financial model, the funding model, the funding formulas, and looking to build a long-term, sustainable, predictable funding model that meets customers' needs, doesn't have distorted aspects of it that are working against what the customer needs are. Boiling that down, at the end we have a number of outcomes. There may be some opportunity for near-term improvements. We certainly will take them if they develop. But the prime effort here will be focused on the FY25 financial plan, which isn't all that far ahead of us. We're looking to come up with a recommended network that would feed into that budget cycle. So in the late fall of calendar 23, to inform and look forward to be implementing changes in fiscal 25. We also will be recommending further changes that would come later as resources are available. On the policy side, we're looking to have a discussion on the role of Metrobus in each of the jurisdictions throughout the region, and to look at the funding formulas and the funding model. The way we look at it, there are really 5 steps to this process, and the first step, as Ellison mentioned, has already happened, which is the bus transformation study. Really lays the foundation, talks about a lot of the factors that we're going to look at and build on. We are starting now step 2, what we call planning foundations. That will involve a lot of outreach during the course of the fall, as well as looking at data and examining where the needs are in the system. So we'll be looking to finalize the guiding principles, the goals and priorities, and identify where there are gaps in service, where there are needs based on data. Starting in the spring of next year, the winter and spring, we'll be looking to develop alternative networks that may have different philosophies. So we have contrasting ways to build out a future network. We'll have public input. We'll come back to the board at various points as well. Also continue that dialogue on the role of Metrobus. By the fall of next year, we will be previewing a final recommended network that, as I mentioned, will then be formally submitted as a draft proposal for the FY25 budget. And then finally, step 5, which is a huge step, is actually implementing these changes. We'll certainly have much more dialogue when we get to that point, but a lot of work to happen at that stage. Within the jurisdiction, Allison and I have actually met with our counterparts in all of the jurisdiction areas before we started to ask, how they wanted to be part of the study and make sure that they were involved. It's a little different in a few of them. So highlighting Prince George's County and the city of Fairfax, they elected to join us in this study. So we'll actually be doing a network redesign as part of this effort for the bus in Prince George's County and the queue system in the city of Fairfax. Montgomery County has already embarked on their own network redesign called Ride On Reimagine. Similar to the city of Alexandria, which did a redesign a few years ago, we will participate in their work and really coordinate the two studies so we're not conflicting with each other or confusing our customers in Montgomery County. As I mentioned, city of Alexandria, we've already participated in the network redesign. We'll continue to look at buses going in and out of Alexandria and working with them. And for Fairfax County, Arlington, and the district, we're fully participating with them, but we're treating their local operations as fixed, and we're looking really at the Metro bus operations in those jurisdictions.
Thanks, Peter. So as Tom said, this is as much, or actually probably more, a communications engagement outreach exercise as it is a technical scope of work, right? So we recognize how important it is to be inclusive, be authentic, be out going to where people are, to hear from them and get their feedback. And so on here we have a lot of different audiences, and we are actively engaging all of them at the moment. So we'll be talking a little bit more about the public outreach, which will start in October, but we are setting up, we're talking to the bus unions and police unions and other represented staff at Metro. We also have we are working to set up listening sessions with our bus operators because, of course, they're on the road every day. They know the system and the customers extraordinarily well. We'll be talking to elected officials. We had the technical committee, first technical advisory committee meeting last week, which is where the jurisdictional staff who will get down into the weeds and really redesign this collaboratively with us. That was last week. And then we'll be working with the advocacy groups, meeting with the RAC and the AAC, as well as business community and other CBOs. So again, we're really trying to be out in front of this, and so trying to make sure that people don't hear about it after the fact, but are really engaging as early as we can be out there. So getting to them where they are, hitting multiple media, I think is really the important thing, and that's really what we heard from our peers as well when we talk to them. So again, the public launch, that will be in October, and so there will be a launch event, media event that we're working on right now. But more importantly, to hear from the customers, we will be going. We've got 15 pop-up road shows to go to big bus transfer centers, fall festivals, because of course we're now in the fall festival season, hitting farmers markets, really trying to go to where customers are. So we've got 15 of those lined up across the region. And then we're going to have bus stop chats where we actually have some more one-on-one conversation with bus customers where they ride. So that's the approach for October into November for that engagement. But again, we'll be launching the website, have social media, have e-newsletters, opportunities for people to make their own video and tell us what they love or don't love about their bus. So that's where we're really hoping to, at this point, understand people's priorities, what works, what doesn't work for them, because that's really what's going to help build out the alternatives in the spring. So looking at the draft guiding principles, we, again, as we talked to our peers, many of them mentioned that these were really helpful when it came down to having more difficult conversations in the future. So having these guiding principles will really help guide our approach and guide those decisions and conversations as we go forward. So I'll read them and happy to have a discussion when we get to the Q&A, but first is to ensure a customer-focused and regional perspective, right? So leading with the customer, leading with the region, engaging and communicating authentically, inclusively, and transparently with our customers and different audiences. Ensure equity is a value throughout the project, so really leading on the analysis that we're doing from the front, and how we engage our customers. Allow customers input, the region's needs, data, and service guidelines to drive decisions. Attract customers with frequent, reliable, and connective service. And finally, make cost-effective and data-driven business decisions. So again, really wanted to be encompassing with what these principles entail, but make sure that we're clear and get your adoption of that from the beginning. And so finally, next steps this fall. Again, we'll be launching publicly in October, and having those additional customer activities across the region into November. Finalizing the project goals, objectives, how we're going to measure what success looks like. And then we are completing and publishing the existing conditions, the market assessment findings. Right now, the annual line performance report that takes all of the bus lines and puts them up against all of the service guidelines and performance targets. We have completed that. That's out on the website for FY 19, 20, and 21. And then we are working on the market assessment of pre- and post-pandemic data. And then finally, we are anticipating coming back to you to update you on kind of what all those findings were, what we heard from all the different audiences. So with that, I look forward to discussion and any questions you might have.
Tom, anything to close it out, or we'll just go? Okay.
Well, actually, my turn.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Great job, team. I want to say one thing. I did go through the same process when I was in Austin at Capital Metro, and many agencies around the country have either started this or actually have gone through it. And I want to grant everyone in one phrase. There's a laughter about this phrase, but it's very serious. I had a mentor that used to say to me, Randy, there's two universal things most people in the world dislike: change and the way things are. And this is probably the ultimate example of transit. So there will be a lot of people that tell us they want changes to the bus network. And when we bring you eventually a policy framework to change that, there will be groups of people very upset about certain changes. We need to do everything we can, and I really appreciate what the team is leaning into here, because I think this is a lesson learned across the industry. The earlier and more concerted effort up front on community engagement, staff engagement, customer engagement, we will get a better product. But I do want to put a marker down now, both publicly and the community. There will clearly be some people that feel upset with change, and our job is to figure out how to make the best bus network for everyone in the region, and especially leaning into, I think, these guidelines that the staff is bringing to you. So thanks for the opportunity to give that context.
Okay, first we'll turn to the committee members. Any comments? Ms. Klein.
Yeah, so I'm going to be the first person who's thrilled that this is happening.
That's the fifth. That's number 5.
No, those were all excited.
Yeah, there we go.
But in all seriousness, no, this is really fantastic and builds on the process that was started, I mean, honestly, like 4 years ago now with the bus transformation project. And it's just really, it's wonderful to see that it's progressing. We've had a very disruptive couple of years, and so this is great to be on track here. I'd like to hear a little bit more about engagement with the other parts of the region and the bus operators there, just because I think ultimately most customers at the end of the day, we probably don't care what color the bus is that comes. It's just, is there going to be a bus, when I need it, where I need it. So, so it sounds like Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, kind of looking at the bus system there as static. Will you continue to engage with those operators throughout? And in Montgomery County, since they're also having a reimagining process happening, how will you avoid sort of confusion and overlap there?
Thank you for that question. This was, so last spring, or spring of 21, We had individual one-on-one conversations with all the DOT leads. We'd had listening sessions with staff to understand as we were scoping, and we'd also talked to peer systems to kind of understand how they'd done it and gone through this whole process. So when we talked to each of the jurisdictions, we said, look, we can redesign your system and our system together. We could, how do you, as the owner and operator of System X, how do you want to be involved? And so, as Peter said, Prince George's County and City of Fairfax said, please, redesign Q and the bus with us. City of Alexandria had just completed Alexandria Transit Vision. I think they adopted it like literally in February of 2020. Like it was right up against the pandemic. And so that system, which we participated in, like together with them to redesign what we're operating in the City of Alexandria, that got implemented, I believe it was last fall. And so that same approach is how we've talked to Montgomery County, right? And so their service area is much larger than ours. And so we said, redesign Metrobus as part of Ride On Reimagined with us, right? Like we're not separated from that. And then as part of, we are looking at places in Montgomery, like connections into adjacent counties, into the district, into Virginia, that would be part of ours. So it's not the cleanest, I will say, and I believe Montgomery County would say the same thing, but I think we are all working together, and we are lockstep with them, making sure when they're out for surveys, we're with them, they're welcome to come with us. And then I will say the other jurisdictions, actually one more thing, Fairfax has been updating their network as well, like in getting lined up for Silver Line 2, they're redesigning their North County routes. So it's happening in different ways, but we are absolutely working with them, jurisdictional staff and DOT leads or operator leads. So yes. Thank you.
Great, that's terrific. That all sounds very good. I recognize it's a messy process because, that's the region we're in, but that sounds very positive. On the topic of region-wide coordination, I think one of the, I don't remember if it was a strategy, a recommendation, or an action item in the bus transformation project, but there was a call for some type of coordinating task force to be created. Did that happen? Is there a coordinating task force?
Yes. We have and actually it's being chaired by the lead from PRTC right now, but we had started that last December, I think was the first meeting. And so it's all been, actually no, we've had some in-person meetings as well, but we're having those meetings, I think it's every 2 months, trying to keep senior leaders across all the different bus providers engaged.
Great. Good news all around.
Yes.
I know that one of the ongoing projects has to do with on-road improvements that Metro does not control. So you're working very closely with jurisdictions on those things. Can you sort of give a little, how has that been going? Is it slowing down at all as this network redesign takes off, or are you going full speed ahead on that?
It is picking up steam. So we had started mainly working with the district. That was the most obvious benefit, and we had we have a great partner there, and so we're moving forward on lots of, and the mayor has put down a marker for a lot of new bus priority projects in the city. So we were moving forward on that, but our bus priority team is working with Maryland SHA in Prince George's County to do some tactical work in the county, working with Montgomery County as well. And I believe they're working with someone in Virginia. I'll have to get back to you exactly whom, but I know there is a lot of work kind of hitting all the different jurisdictions and really trying to double down on the work that we need to get buses more reliable on the roads.
I'm glad that's picking up steam. That's great. And then one last question. One thing that surprised me in the presentation was the disparity between the number of young people in the region and the percentage of those who are riding the bus. I was curious if you know how young people is defined, what age range that is, why that might be such a small percentage of young people who are
So
riding the bus?
it is under 18. I know that from a survey perspective, we actually don't survey, I don't know if it's legally done, but we don't, when we go out, like we're out for the rail survey now, we are not surveying people under 18. So there is a bit of work to better understand that percentage of the customers.
Yeah, that seems surprising to me because I think young people do tend to be riding the bus. So, okay, thank you very much. This is all great. I'm still thrilled.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Klein. Deputy Mayor Babers, and then Mr. Letourneau, who's on the phone.
Thank you all for the presentation. And since I represent DC, I believe most people are aware that we have most of the bus service, and we appreciate the bus service. And I don't really have a question, but I actually just have a comment to make sure that people in the audience, the listening public, in the past, I have, repeatedly asked the question when we talk about equity, who is the expert at WMATA as it relates to equity, and how do we know that, equity is being built into everything? And I just want to thank Randy and let you all know that under Randy's leadership, WMATA will be seeking a chief equity officer. I believe the position is posted. It's currently posted, and so I am thrilled and excited about that. And so I could just see that as we continue through all the policies and the processes related to WMATA, that we absolutely will have someone who is actually versed in equity, and I can stop asking that question. So thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mr. Letourneau?
Thank you. First of all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Matt. Thank you.
Oh, that's great news. Okay. Apologize, I can't be with you in person. I'm on business travel this week. But I want to echo Sarah's excitement, first of all, but also just maybe hone in on one element of the presentation, which we talked a little bit about funding. And we mentioned that I think it was kind of hinted to that there are some issues with the funding formula. And I really want to sort of put an exclamation point on that. I think the current subsidy formula is not working well. I don't think it's serving any of the jurisdictions very well because it's really been kind of warped over the years and things have been added on. And so in some ways, it's actually acting as a mechanism by which we can't do some of the things that some of the jurisdictions would probably like to do. Because the way that the subsidy works, it ends up being somewhat unfair in terms of who's paying for that. So I just wanted to ask, I think this is an outstanding project, badly needed. How do we anticipate working on the subsidy formula for bus specifically in concert with this? How exactly is that going to work?
Thank you for your question. Yes, so actually that was one of the recommendations from Bus Transformation was to revisit the subsidy formula, and that we are doing in parallel with, actually as part of the network redesign. And so that is something we actually just kicked off internally to start understanding what are, Director Letourneau, you refer to many of the issues, and I think we could take a whiteboard and a sticky on the side of the room and come up with a whole list ourselves. And I know there are lots of ideas of how to make different changes. So we are absolutely aiming for to have the subsidy formula redone in line with the new network that we're delivering. So that is absolutely working with our jurisdictional staff. I think as someone, I'm not sure who, that's not really a customer-oriented thing, right? This is very much, inside baseball and how it's paid for. The customers just want the bus to show up. So it's very much a conversation with our jurisdictional partners, and we are actively moving on that, yes.
Great, thank you.
And Matt, just for the minutes, we want to make sure, are you excited or thrilled?
Oh, I'm both.
You're both. He's
I'm
both.
both.
He's in both.
Director
camps. Okay.
Letourneau was excited and thrilled.
All right. Dr. Lowe.
It's going to take more than this to get me excited or thrilled, which feels weird since I feel like I'm usually like the gerbil on Ritalin in our meetings. So there's just a few things I want to go through today. The first is that planning process identified as and recommended in 2018. It's 2022, so it's taken us 20 years. So let's just be careful to not give our customers or our stakeholders whiplash as we go through this process. It is really important that we have frequent updates and a lot of input as we go through this, because everyone's been wondering what's been going on for the last 4 years and when we were going to act on our recommendation. I did hear that there was a pandemic and a couple other things that happened. So I'm not saying that everyone's been sitting around twiddling their thumbs, but just be realistic about how this, all that means is that for people, it doesn't just feel like 4 years passed, it feels like 1,000 years passed. And we didn't act on our recommendation. We did make some changes to the bus network because of the pandemic. So one thing we need to do is go back to the FY23 budget public comments and other periods in which folks have already provided input about changes that have already happened to the bus network. We actually need to reach out to those people because they have already provided comments. We need to go back to them and actively engage and loop them into this process. So the other thing to flag about that is that with DC's advisory neighborhood commissions all turning over after the November 8th election, the timing is a bit tight, actually, regarding the period during which we're saying we're going to collect public comment. So please be cognizant of that. Please be realistic of that. Don't make sure that new commissioners have a chance to be informed of this process and to youth engagement being an example of this, right? Like when we were reviewing the public input from last year's writer survey, I specifically flagged that this is at my first board meeting that we didn't do youth engagement and that it was something we needed to think about and come up with a way to do. So now it's a year later, and what's our plan for how to do youth engagement? It's okay if we can't do it through a field survey, but that doesn't mean we can't do youth engagement. It doesn't mean that youth don't want to give input. So we should have something on that since it's been flagged for a year. I will get excited about this through frequent updates. It would be helpful for me to know who on the project team I can refer folks to when I hear from people who are saying like, hey, what's going on with this? How do I give input, et cetera. I just need a point of contact to channel some of that to. And I also think it's good that we're going to talk about the subsidy formula. I think in the really bigger picture, it seems to me like how weird the formula has gotten, that a lot of that is being driven by the 3% cap that's legislated. So that's another thing that I have realistic expectations about how great whatever comes out of that process can be. But
Chair. So I'm inspired by this project.
Another column.
Really appreciate your integrated regional approach and your data-driven business decisions. That focus is going to be critical for success. But I want to piggyback on Vice Chair Baber's comment with regard to equity. I noticed on slide 14, the third bullet down, it stated, ensure equity is a value throughout the project. And I know that you're committed to equity. That is a very passive statement in comparison to what I think you're going to do and the challenges you have ahead of you. And words mean something. So I just wanted to be sure that we ensure that when we publicize this and we go out and we speak, that it's a commitment, not just ensuring that it's a value. And maybe you can help me understand why we use that language, ensure that it's a value rather than a commitment.
I can make a comment on the last piece, board member. So I think the team, we're trying to ground values that are fundamental. So I guess the word commitment, I think, can be the same type of meaning for staff, meaning it's not a priority, because priorities can change, and we want to make this clear. This isn't changing. This is how we are grounding the process. Equity is at the forefront of the thought process, and the Title VI at the end, from a quote-unquote compliance part of view, will validate that we did it correctly, not that we're doing that at the end to see if we did it correctly.
All right. Any final comments from the team? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the committee is being asked to approve the project's guiding principles this morning. If there is no further discussion, I'd like to ask for a motion from a committee member to approve the guiding principles before us.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Klein. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Babers. Any final comments or questions? Hearing none, Ms. Ellison, please call the vote.
Chair Smedberg? Aye. Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Ms. Klein? Aye. The motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. This completes the business for today, and I will stand adjourned, and I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Letourneau to begin the Finance and Capital Committee. Hold on, Matt. Matt, hold on 1 second.
We also need time for staff to get to the table.
Matt, can we hear you now? Yeah. No?
You want me to try now? Something happened. Are we good?
You're good.
You're good.
You're good.
You're good now.
I'm good?
Yep.
Okay. Well, as I was saying, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning and welcome to the Finance and Capital meeting. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections by members of the Finance Committee? Hearing and seeing none, the agenda is approved. Now to the approval of the minutes. We have the minutes of our July 14th meeting. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none and seeing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. We have two items on the agenda, one for action for the committee and one that's an important informational update. First, the committee is being asked to authorize staff to negotiate a joint development agreement and hold a public hearing regarding changes to transit facilities at the Greenbelt Metro Station, should that site be selected by the GSA as the location of the new FBI headquarters. And I'll emphasize, should that site be selected. This is not an indication that the site has been selected. Next, staff will provide an update on the outlook for Metro's FY 2024 budget. We will recognize that next year's fiscal year will be very challenging, and we want to begin engaging our customers and stakeholders as publicly as we can, not only on the coming year's budget, but the long-term vision for Metro and the challenges we have with our fiscal picture. At this point, all options are on the table for us, which I think you'll see is reflected in the presentation. This presentation is the start of the budget conversation, so we're doing things a little bit differently this year. Oftentimes, the general manager comes to the board with a budget around the November timeframe, and it's already pretty well put together, and quite frankly, the board is kind of doing things on the margins. This year is a little bit different. We're starting the process earlier, and there's a lot more that's on the table. First, I'll turn the floor over to Liz Price, Vice President for Real Estate and Parking, to begin our first item. Ms. Price.
Thank you, Chairman Letourneau and members of the Finance and Capital Committee. Today I will provide an update on activity related to WMATA-owned property at the Greenbelt Metro Station, specifically recent inquiries from the General Services Administration, or GSA, about the site as part of their search for a new FBI headquarters. Staff will also be asking the board today to authorize staff to enter into joint development negotiations with the GSA without open competition, and to authorize a compact public hearing if the site is ultimately selected by GSA. By way of background, WMATA owns approximately 80 acres of land at Greenbelt Metro. In 2000, the board approved a joint development agreement with a private developer for the site. In 2014, GSA initiated a search for a new FBI headquarters in the region and shortlisted 3 sites, including one owned by WMATA, the Greenbelt Metro site. In 2017, GSA canceled the FBI procurement, and in 2019, the JDA expired and terminating all development rights. This year, GSA restarted its search for an FBI headquarters site and was directed by Congress to consider only the 3 previous shortlisted sites and to make a decision as expeditiously as possible. WMATA responded this month to GSA's request for updated information about the Greenbelt site, including whether it was still available for sale, WMATA's disposition approval process, and the purchase price if the site were to be selected. The existing site is approximately 88 acres and includes today 9 bus bays, nearly 3,339 parking spaces, as well as a kiss and ride facility of approximately 338 spaces. Although we know from GSA that the estimated number of employees to be housed at a future FBI headquarters has decreased since the original search to about 7,500 employees, GSA has indicated that it is interested to consider the Greenbelt site that it previously considered, which was a nearly 40-acre federal campus that could accommodate up to 2.1 million square feet of office space, which is shown on this slide in sort of the light blue on the lower portion of the site. With that as the anchor, the development concept today would still allow for another 1.3 million square feet of additional private development potential. And we'll talk more today about our recommendation to consolidate the transit facilities today, which are spread across the site, into a consolidated facility with bus and parking in one structure. The development concept plan would also improve station access from 495 as well as local surrounding roads. Future development of this site would increase ridership and fare revenue as a result, as well as real estate revenues if WMATA were to sell the site to GSA if it were selected. Changes to transit facilities at Greenbelt have been under discussion for a number of years. In the past year, staff has reevaluated the existing transit facilities as well as future needs and determined that a reduction in capacity would bring parking supply, more in line with pre-COVID utilization rates would be appropriate. It was also determined that an alternative design consolidating these facilities into one structure would improve the feasibility of future development, accelerate the delivery of private development, and also reduce costs to Metro. The plan, the proposed transit facility plan on the right shows the new recommended estimate of 9 bus bays, which is the same that we have today, as well as a reduction in parking to 2,400 spaces and 20 kiss and ride spaces, which would be accessed from a curbside facility. WMATA's compact requires public input on any proposed changes to transit facilities. So we're required to have a compact public hearing to solicit feedback from the community, Metro customers, as well as local residents and also users of the surrounding road network. We're seeking authorization today for staff to hold a public hearing in the future. We will schedule that hearing if and when the site is selected by GSA, which, as the chairman mentioned, it has not been selected. And once a compact public hearing were held, we would come back to the board for approval of any changes and amendments to the mass transit plan. So with that, staff is recommending or requesting board authorization today to negotiate a joint development agreement with the GSA for the sale of up to 40 acres of Metro property at the Greenbelt station without holding competitive solicitation, as well as to hold a compact public hearing on proposed changes to the station if the site were to be selected. Thank you.
Mr. Letourneau, I'm going to turn it to the GM just for a moment.
Thank you, Chair and Committee Chair Letourneau. I think it's important that I want to read something that our General Counsel put together, just so we provide a lot of clarity between the board policy and staff implementation related to this topic. As Liz is mentioning, this is in front of you all, not because WMATA is actually involved in the site selection. We are being responsive to the GSA because we happen to own real estate at one of those 3 locations. If we happen to have real estate at all 3 locations, Liz would be responsive to all 3 locations. So I just want to kind of put that on the record. I think it's important to make sure there's clarity around the following points. So if you give me a little grace, I'm going to read this so I can, I definitely don't want Patty upset at me if I she's probably even watching when she's on vacation. The board adopted the joint development policies in April 2018, it's resolution 2018-13. Section 3.3 of the joint development policies permits staff to consider unsolicited offers in limited cases, i.e., or such as a lease or purchase proposal from a jurisdictional partner. Staff prepared and published the Joint Development Program Guidelines, which implements the board's joint development policy. The guidelines appear to have unintentionally narrowed the exception to open competition by providing that staff may consider unsolicited, quote, offers from one of the signatories to WMATA's organizational document, the WMATA Compact, or one of the local governments located in the WMATA transit zone for a public facility or space to be used and to be operated by the jurisdiction. In section 5.6.3 of the guideline, and that's in 5.6.3 of the guidelines, staff intended to, but did not timely amend and provide clarity that the guidelines should also include the federal government as a jurisdictional partner and therefore be exempted from the open competition as well. Staff intends to amend the guidelines immediately to reflect this clarification, which is completely consistent with the board's joint development policies. So I thought it was really important for the record that we read that in and really make sure there's clarity between the board policy and what staff did, totally unintentionally, almost seeming narrow, and that the federal government obviously is part of the partnership. So happy to, Liz could probably take some questions. We have some legal counsel as well, but I just thought it'd be good to put that on the record. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Randy. Liz, just before I open it up, can you just explain the need for the advertisement of the compact public hearing at this point?
We are not intending to advertise the public hearing, but by the board approval process, we first have to ask the board to authorize us to schedule the public hearing, so that's what we're seeking today. We will not seek to schedule the public hearing if and until the site is selected. So we're just simply getting the first approval here, and if there's a need for the hearing, we will proceed at that time.
Okay. Let me open it up first to members of the committee, which I believe are Ms. Babers and Ms. Klein. Do you have any questions or comments?
I have none.
Okay. Other members of the board or the committee? Yeah, the board.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I appreciate the general manager reaching out, because I think there's been a little confusion that we're favoring one side over the other, and that is definitely not the case. It's just simply responding to a request from the GSA. There's also I'm sure a very attractive site to the FBI as well in Franconia, so the two sites will be in competition with each other. But that is not our business. That is the GSA's business. That's the FBI's business. And just so we're clear. Well, just so we're clear, I mean, both sites are transit oriented. Both are by metro stations. Both have bus access. All that kind of stuff. So, we just want to be clear that we're not favoring one side or the other. Sure.
Sorry, was someone trying to get in?
Dr. Lowe.
Dr. Lowe.
Yeah, sorry. It was just it was a lot of legalese. So I just want to make sure that I understood. It's just that WMATA only owns land at one of the sites? That's what's going on? Right. Okay. Thank you.
That's it.
Yeah.
A small piece of the project, small piece of the plot.
Right. So I'll just echo what Chairman Smedberg said. Obviously, appreciate the input that we've heard. I know there are some concerns in Fairfax County about the action that Metro is taking, but we are required to try to close the budget gap that we have. So I will turn it over to Mr. Anasike and Mr. Webster for this presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Lotano and members of the committee. My name is Dennis Anasike, Chief Financial Officer for Metro. Today's presentation on Metro's financial outlook for the upcoming fiscal year will review service, fares, and funding options that could be part of the General Manager's FY 2024 budget proposal that is due to the committee in November. At the conclusion of today's presentation, staff will look for committee guidance on policy options that we should further explore. As background, transit systems have recently expressed huge ridership loss, in part due to ride shares and now the pandemic that is reshaping historical transit revenue patterns. However, Metro's fiscal challenges are more structural and fundamentally tied to Metro's customer revenue structure and regional subsidy structure, some of which the chairman mentioned earlier today. When you look at customer revenues, our region has historically had high telework, again in part because of large federal as well as contract workforce that were major customers of Metro prior to the pandemic. Today, COVID-induced ridership changes, both in travel patterns and revenues, have increased telework adoption. In addition, customer revenues from peak as well as distance fares made Metro one of the highest fare box recovery systems in the nation. Again, this customer revenue performance is declining with lower ridership, changing ridership patterns, and increase in fare evasion. And when you look to the cost structure, I think we all have seen that the primary cost driver for transit systems across the globe is customer as well as community expectations around service, frequency, reliability, as well as price, all of which end up driving ridership. As with other transit systems, labor cost is a major part of Metro's operating budget, in our case ranging between 60 and 70%. And as the committee has seen over the last 2 years, base labor cost has gone up 10% on average year over year. And in terms of the third bucket, which is resource or subsidy structure, our region provides and has always provided significant subsidy to Metro each year to support service delivery. Along with federal relief funds, this subsidy enabled Metro to balance recent budgets despite the pandemic. However, Metro's subsidy structure changed in FY 2020 when the operating subsidy growth was capped at 3% annually as part of a new $500 million regional revenue contribution dedicated to capital investment. But as ridership patterns continue to change, Metro has no tools within the organization to bridge the resulting revenue gap. This slide is one that the committee has seen before, and it shows Metro's ridership improvements since COVID, as well as projected ridership through 2025. For next fiscal year, the budget will assume ridership will rebound to 218 million trips, which is 70% of pre-pandemic ridership expectations. This is an improvement, actually, of 40 million trips over staff's initial projection, but it's based on how ridership is actually performing today on the system. System ridership, as you looked to the right end of the spectrum, is projected to reach 75% of pre-pandemic level by 2025. This is the same level of ridership expectation that staff shared with the board a few years back, and remains so based on what we're hearing across the nation. As we saw in the previous slide, ridership is rebounding on Metro. However, changes in ridership or travel patterns are creating uneven customer revenue recovery. The right side of this slide shows estimated total operating revenue for FY 2024 at $465 million. This amount is 22% higher than the current fiscal year, but 40% below pre-COVID operating revenue, which you can see at the bottom of the right-hand side. The year-over-year ridership comparison, however, on the upper section of the left-hand side shows that peak Metro Rail ridership is down 8% since 2019, compared to a 5% drop in peak fare revenues. Similarly, the distance traveled by customers on Metro Rail is also down, highlighting increased telework, which I spoke about a little bit earlier. These factors, as well as increase in fare evasion, are some of the drivers for the lower operating revenue projected for FY 2024. The good news, however, is that Metro has been able to reduce the original deficit forecast for FY 24 that was shared with this board some time ago. Starting from the left-hand side of the slide, the big red bar shows the original $318.6 million budget gap. Over fiscal years 23 and 24, Metro projects an additional $150 million of personal cost growth tied to labor and contract increases, as shown by the smaller red bar next to the one I just described. At the same time, Metro achieved $284 million of operating budget favorability in FY 2022 from reduced expenses as well as from increase in revenues that were better than budget. As a result, Metro is now looking at a $185 million budget gap for FY 2024 that needs to be closed based on the options that Tom and I will discuss the committee later today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn the mic over to Tom.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. In the past 18 months, Metro has implemented several customer-focused fare and service changes intended, again, to promote ridership, equity, and an improved customer experience. In FY22, several improvements began, including free rail-to-bus transfers, a $2 weekend rail flat fare, a lower 7-day regional bus pass, or lower priced 7-day regional bus pass. And for the current fiscal year, Metro has also implemented $2 late night rail fares after 9:30 and a lower price for monthly unlimited passes. In general, customer response to these changes has been good, and we expect ridership impacts from these changes to build over time. The FY23 budget continues to support the region's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic by building on important steps taken to restore service, with improvements to provide more service, later hours, and more convenient fare options. The major change on bus was establishing a frequent service network about a year ago, Labor Day of 2021, with 20 lines offering frequencies of 12 minutes or better, and an additional 16 lines offering frequencies of 20 minutes or better from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. 7 days a week. Budgeted Metro Rail service levels were also improved all day with train frequencies of at least, in the budget, 10 minutes during the AM and PM peaks, 12 minutes all day, and 15 minutes after 9:30 p.m. And Metro Access continues to provide ongoing accessibility through paratransit service for those who are unable to use Metro Bus and Metro Rail. The frequent service network launched again in September of last year, offers more frequent service. This shift to an all-day service network of frequent buses puts Metro on the path to serve customers at the times of day and days of week when they travel. It also significantly increases access to transit for the region's most vulnerable populations, including low-income populations and people of color. Since the frequent service network was introduced, we've seen very positive evidence that bus customers are responding. There's been higher ridership growth on the 36 bus lines that were upgraded to more frequent all-day service when compared to the rest of the bus network. Ridership grew more on lines and at times when service increased the most, such as Sunday service. The upgraded lines serve a majority of our bus customers, including 47% on the 20 12-minute lines. So Metro will continue to work to adapt service and fares to support customers in the region, and there's certainly an opportunity to consider changes to be more customer-focused, equitable, and inclusive, and optimize the use of our infrastructure and equipment, and to support the board's adopted fare policy principles. We're working to build on recent service and fare changes by developing concepts for consideration as part of the upcoming budget and beyond. This includes, as we discussed earlier this morning, the Better Bus effort and the network redesign, as well as a focus on concepts to optimize Metro Rail service and fare improvements. So again, equity impacts of fare and service changes will be a value throughout that process and considered and analyzed throughout, but then validated as part of the formal Title VI process before board adoption and before any implementation. So now I'll run through some of the concepts that Metro and the board could consider from both a fare and from a rail service optimization standpoint. So the Metro could consider changes to the existing fare levels, so pricing changes, changing or eliminating the time of day price difference between the peak period or traditional peak period and traditional non-peak period, establishing potentially a zone fare to replace Metro's current mileage-based fare structure, offering a low-income fare program or programs, reducing parking fees to increase utilization and to drive overall ridership, reduce the bus fare, potentially reducing it to $1 instead of the current $2 fare, as some bus operators have done in our region, and then considering options for Metro Access fares. Of course, Metro Access fares are driven by the base bus and rail fares, so there will be impacts if there are changes. Also looking at Metro Access fare predictability. And then for the long term, although the work is beginning now, considering programs like fare capping and fare integration with other entities in our region that are dependent on system improvements our fare system. On rail service optimization, several concepts for consideration and as Dennis mentioned, further development, review, and discussion. Potential ideas include increasing service on the core and southern segments of the green and yellow lines, which would help serve our fastest growing parts of the region. Optimizing red line service, concentrating frequency in the highest ridership segments of the line. Optimizing silver line service in response to what will be a very long run time for the full length of the service on the silver line. Considerations could include first and last train times, airport service direct or to Dulles Airport, and of course balancing blue, orange, silver frequency in the core and at the terminal stations or to the terminal stations. Also, Metro could consider changing operating hours to include potentially opening earlier on Saturdays and Sundays, or closing later on Fridays and Saturdays. And in conjunction with that, considering changes to our approach to maintenance with some concepts including focused, scheduled, pre-announced maintenance on certain segments of the system during lower ridership periods during the year. And then also looking at potentially supplementary or additional bus service over the nighttime. And as we discussed this morning, Metro's launching our Metro Bus or Better Bus program and network redesign with recommendations designed to support the next budget cycle, FY25. With that, I'll turn it back to Dennis.
So in terms of closing the remaining budget gap, staff has identified additional opportunities as well as opportunities to further reduce cost in order to reduce the $184 or $85 million budget gap that we have for FY 2024. This slide shows those opportunities on both passenger revenues as well as non-passenger revenues, totaling almost $29 million. Initially, we have additional expectations of increased ridership, again, based on current performance, and some adjustments to our expected ridership trajectory over the next year. And we're also looking at other non-fare opportunities that will provide $17 million to help reduce the budget gap in FY 2024, which leaves about $146 million. So depending on the financial impact of the service and fare optimization options that Tom just described, staff may need direction on leverage and other options to balance the operating budget in FY 2024. A potential option for the board to consider is the use of federal grant funds to pay for eligible maintenance activities. The left side of this slide shows how much Metro spends each year within the operating budget on maintenance activities, which is shown in the gray bars, as well as the portion of that amount which is paid using eligible grant funds, which is shown in the blue bars. When you look at the other side of that particular chart, the top right quadrant shows additional $125 million annual grant funding that recently was awarded to Metro, thanks to our region's congressional delegation. On the lower quadrant, however, we show continued growth of Metro's capital program as a whole, indicating sufficient resources, at least in the meantime, to continue to maintain the trajectory in terms of capital maintenance. Assuming Metro can close its remaining budget gap in FY 2024, the long-term operating budget outlook, based on current service and revenue structure, shows significant and growing budget gaps. And depending on the level of ridership recovery expected in the out years, Metro could be looking at between $700 and $900 million gap by 2029. Our final slide, Mr. Chairman, lays out the major steps in Metro's budget cycle, including the general manager's budget proposal that is due in November, as well as budget workshops and public engagement as we prepare the budget. I want to highlight the blue bar on the bottom, which shows that even beyond what Metro has done historically, there will be a more robust and aggressive outreach to the region to make sure that the proposals that the general manager is going to put out to the board has wide circulation and consultation. With that, Mr. Chairman, we will be happy to respond to any questions regarding the presentation.
Thank you, Dennis. Just before we open it up for questions, I think the slide previous, which shows the long-term budget outlook, which is a pretty daunting slide, probably requires a little bit more explanation, especially for the public, in terms of why that budget gap is going to grow so much and what's driving those figures.
Mr. Chairman, a key reason why the gap seems significant is that over the last 2 years, I think the $2.6 billion federal funding that have allowed and enabled the region to maintain service and not lay off employees have, not just for Metro, but for other transit systems, covered the magnitude of the challenge faced in transit systems, right? And if you assume that ridership has changed, that also means that the revenue structure has fundamentally changed. While Metro continues to improve service and is seeing some restoration of the lost rides on the system, there is still a significant gap between where we are today as an organization and where we expect to be a year from now. But going back to slide 2, I think I started by saying that while these recent events have highlighted the challenges that this organization faces, that there's a more fundamental reason why the structural gap exists, based on not just the cost structure, but also the subsidy structure and the fact that Metro, compared to other large transit systems, is funded differently, and which, again, Mr. Chairman, you sort of alluded to this morning in the prior conversations.
Okay, thank you. I may have some additional comments, but let's go ahead and first ask if members of the committee have questions or comments.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you, Dennis and Tom, for that overview. I just have a couple of questions. On slide 28, can we go? Thank you. No, okay, go for it. Okay. So I guess, we've talked a lot, and I know that ridership is improving. What are we really basing the 70% and the 75% ridership on?
The 70%, if you recall, the last time you saw this slide, the expected ridership rebound at that time was less than 70%.
Mm-hmm.
So currently, and if you go back, actually, if I go back slightly to with respect to FY 2022, that we expect to come to the board with quite soon. We performed, as a system, better than we budgeted. If you recall, the expectation was that we were going to be, I think, around, it was less than 42%. We ended up with a higher ridership than we budgeted. Again, if you think back to the time when we were developing that budget, the pandemic was, we're in the midst of the pandemic, which is currently receding. Customers started coming back. Obviously, there was public engagement about the safety of the system, the fact that we adjusted service to focus particularly on the bus system, where we've seen incredible increase in terms of people coming back compared to where it was prior to the pandemic. Based on that, we exceeded expectations for FY 2022. As of today, and Tom can speak a little bit to this, we are continuing to see more aggressive, a better return, particularly on rail, which was performing worse than bus previously. Based on that, we believe that we will hit the target for this year, and that based on the continued growth and the changes that are being proposed, that we will get to 70% instead of the prior ridership level that we budgeted and shared with the board in FY 2024.
Okay, thank you. And does that ridership assumption assume that we'll have all the 7,000 series back?
It assumes that we will have more of that back, but even with current capacity, that assumption believes that there's sufficient capacity to get to that 70% of prior ridership levels, with the progress that is being made with respect to the 7,000 series.
Okay, thank you. Let's jump to 29, I think. Slide 29? No, it must be 30. Okay, here we go. So the $230 million in expense reductions, what kind of expenses were those it's kind of hard to put your hands around what's in there, what's in that bucket.
If you step back and think of our overall cost structure being almost 70% labor, so most of the things in there has to do with employees, has to do with vacancies, has to do with reduced cost expenditures, both on the labor side as well as the non-labor side. So one of the things that management has been clear about is the need to conserve resources, and to do that we started with making sure that we were scrutinizing both recruitment, hiring, except for safety-sensitive positions. Those were excluded from the controls that were imposed in the system. Obviously, it's been a little challenging even recruiting in these times. So that has certainly contributed to the level of savings that you have on the personnel side. But at the same time, we were taking a similar approach with respect to the non-personnel side, delaying purchases, again, trying to make sure that as we know that the federal resources are going to be diminishing, trying to take steps ahead of time to see how much we can preserve to give us additional headrooms going forward.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, if I have a couple of
Yes,
questions. Actually,
Ms.
most
Klein,
of the
go ahead.
comments. I think this is a great presentation, and I really appreciate how much how many innovative ideas are put on the table for consideration. I think that we have a lot to wrestle with, but this will be really helpful to get those conversations started. What is the process from here? Will staff be providing sort of analysis of each option, or do we sort of have to say we want number 1, 4, and 6, and then you'll come back to us?
So we're working hard now on analysis and development of the concepts and welfare and rail service that I described. I think two things. One, we intend to bring forward the results of that analysis and share that with the board and the public. It is helpful, though, to have relative priority among those concepts. As you said, they're broad and there's many of them. So the further along we go, refining those things down based on the priorities and the direction from the board would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, honestly, I don't think I would take anything off the presentation at this moment, which isn't going to be helpful to you in terms of staff hours spent analyzing this, but they are all interesting ideas depending on how they're implemented, and it brings me in mind of what the general manager said about change and the way things are. Some of these things, like a zone fare, would be a really different thing for this region, but something we should consider, I think. I was pleased to see low-income fare and metro access fare predictability on the list as well, because I think that those are important considerations from a customer perspective. So I'm glad to see those on the list. I think with regard to the preventive maintenance, I think it's important that that everyone understands that this is not a question about whether Metro is going to continue doing maintenance or not. This is a question of whether some of the federal funding that we receive is going to be used for those maintenance activities, or whether we're going to use other funding for that. So I think, in light of the fact that we've gotten a significant increase in federal funding, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed in 2021, it is worth considering, increasing the amount of federal funding used for that purpose. And I hope that as part of the analysis, it would be interesting to me to see, so right now, there's a board set cap of...
Members of the board?
Mr. Chair. Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Aniseki, I'm curious when you, this is a great start. Give us a little more clarity or thought behind when you say things, when you talk about subsidy, looking at subsidy structure. What do you mean exactly by that at this point in time? I know the memo went into a little more detail than the presentation did, obviously, but could we have a little more, your comments on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I was attempting to say, Mr. Chairman, is that that Metro's operating environment is unique. And part of that uniqueness is the way Metro is funded. And when you compare Metro to other transit systems of similar capacity, size, and relevance, what you see a different picture in terms of what the revenue structure looks like. And particularly now in this environment where Metro's primary driver, which was ridership and therefore revenue, which placed it actually in the top 5% of transit systems domestically in terms of how much customers contributed to operating costs, you see that is changing changing primarily because if you go from a stage where you had 100% ridership to 50% ridership or 80% ridership, there's a gap there, and that gap translates directly to the bottom line, which is revenue. And therefore, when you look at Metro and ask yourself, where does Metro, as an organization, whether Metro has the capacity to address that itself within the organization, which other transit systems have? And the answer is certainly no, right? That's what I was referring to when I said that the subsidy structure in this region obviously creates an environment where you have limited capacity as a board, as an organization, to actually address some of these issues yourself.
Yeah, and Dennis, I think, it's becoming clearer and clearer, particularly when you see that next to the last slide, that the financial structure is just simply not sustainable into the future. I mean, I think that's a fair statement. I mean, we're already seeing that. We've seen it even before this. But it's becoming clearer and clearer. And we don't know exactly how people are going to be using the system in the future. We hope a lot, obviously, but it'll be a different. It won't be the Monday through Friday 9 to 5. It'll be very different, and so there are a lot of factors that will go into it. But the underlying structure is beginning to break down almost, really.
Exactly.
And it's going to place an undue burden on the jurisdictions, and we have very little room to deal with that right now. So we're going to have a larger regional conversation about that, probably sooner than later.
That's correct.
Is that I think that's a fair statement.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
thank you, Mr.
Just a comment on that, Chair Letourneau?
Yes.
Thank you. Chair, I think you were hitting the nail on the head, and we have to be able to separate this fiscal year for the longer. We have a few tools in this fiscal year, and I think Dennis and Tom did a good job of presenting some optionality to Director Klein's point. We expect every meeting we have to be coming back and talking about the budget and analysis, and this isn't going to be, we talked about today, and then you see the GM's budget proposal. We're going to do a lot with this, and we want as many stakeholders and community members to be part of that process. I think the part, Chair, that you're hitting, and I think it's so critical for the board and this organization, and quite frankly, all of our partners, is, I've been saying this a lot lately, we have to figure out what we want Metro to be as a region, and then figure out how to fund that, versus how much money we have, and that's what Metro is. And if you look around our region, we, just in the last week, multiple of our jurisdictional partners have had record surpluses, because they do have a variety of revenue sources. And what we are kind of challenged with here is we have very little tools at all to manage ups and downs in economic cycles and in our operations. So it has been an incredible amount of inflationary pressure across every part of the world, and other organizations can balance that because they have different revenue sources. So I think I really like the strategic transformation plan process we're about to go through. Some of that may actually be practical, and some of it may be aspirational, but I think we should set that marker out as the region to say what we want to be, and that what we want to be doesn't necessarily mean 2025, maybe certain things in 2025, but we got to put a marker down what we want to be for 2028, 2035, 2040, etc. And I know a lot of people in this region want this organization. I hear it a lot. We want you to be more strategic and think that way. It's very hard to be strategic if we have to go every couple of years with the old analogy of hand to mouth to think about how you're funding. So to line up strategy means to line up resourcing. And then I think the whole region can buy into what we want Metro to be for the long term. So just want to double down on this, because I think you are hitting the nail on the head of what we have to get the whole region bought into the future of the organization.
And I also think, too, there's also probably some structural challenges internally as well. I mean, we got to take that head on. What is Metro going to look like internally as you look at bus transformation, how people are using the rail?
Electrification, where our depots are located, hours of construction, when do we do major rehabilitations, and when do we not do those? There's a lot at play here. One thing that I will tell you in my first 8 weeks of being the general manager is I have not had a conversation with anyone, a customer, an elected official, you name it, that does not want this organization to be successful. And they all know to a person how important this organization is to the success of the region. So I think that we're starting with a base of great awareness of the value of transit. Now we have to articulate that into regionally consensus of what we want Metro to be to effectuate those values. And so I actually am, I'm going to be a pessimist until proven, or optimist, sorry. Optimist. Thrilled, I'm inspired,
That is not a
I'm
column.
excited.
Pessimism is not a column.
Yeah, but I'm going to be optimist until proven otherwise. I think this region is going to rally around the cause of saying, what do we want transit to look like, and then we'll figure out how Metro does that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I think Dr. Lowe is trying to get in. Go ahead, Tracy.
Thanks, Matt. Could we put that second to last slide back up? There we are. Yeah, I think I want to thank staff for this presentation as well, and say that I think that it's responsive to the concerns of everyone in the region, that we are starting to talk not just about the next fiscal year, but the long-term budget outlook for WMATA, and to wrap our heads around the fact that, even if telework had never been invented, that WMATA had these structural budget issues, that are just, these are cumulative and long-term issues related to the cost of providing service, the cost of labor, the cost of inflation. We can figure this out. But by we, I mean the entire region and not just the WMATA board. That said, it is really exciting, Randy, to look at this presentation and to see how creative the staff are getting about bringing innovative ideas on deck to start to address this in the near term. Because we can't ask the region to get creative about how they support WMATA unless we're also getting creative about how we operate WMATA. That said, creativity is, I am excited. But we can't just be like a bunny jumping from one thing to another thing. We can't adopt an innovative new fare structure for FY24 and then adopt another innovative new fare structure for FY25. We have riders that are still confused about how we stop charging fares for a while, and are we doing that again now? There's just so much education that we have to do around any change in our fare structure, our fare technology, etc. So we will have to proceed in a somewhat measured way, though the time is now to be innovative. And then, of course, everything that we do, both because it's our core value and because it's a federal mandate, needs to pass a federally mandated analysis about what the impacts are in terms of a number of dimensions of equity. So I'm excited about what's possible, and I'm really happy that we moved up the timeline on this, and I just want to commend staff for, this has been a really helpful presentation in terms of starting to think all this through.
Thank you. Anyone else there, Mr. Drummer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to echo that inspiration associated with what you're doing. You really laid it out well. I respect, Dennis, your comment about saying that staff may need direction from the board as we proceed in some of these opportunities that are on the table. And I want to encourage you as a staff to present bold packages to us as courses of action and give us a chance to draw conclusions, provide guidance, and then make those decisions that we're supposed to make. Over the past year or so, I've watched us in this process knowing that we had this challenge looming ahead of us. And what we don't want to do is be passive in the approach. And I would say there is an extraordinary amount of capabilities, knowledge, and expertise on our staff. And we want you to exhaust that and come to us with bold courses of action so that we can either say yes or some hybrid of what it is you're recommending. But I want to encourage you to take advantage of that. Thanks.
Thanks. Let me just make a couple comments. Maybe I'm switching with Tracy roles a little bit today. I'm not sure I'm quite as excited about this presentation as I was Bus Network. I think when you look at slide 37, which is options for closing the $184 million budget gap, and then when we go back and look at the fare optimization concepts and even sort of the list of things on the table, there's a little bit of a disconnect. Because the fare optimization concepts, which are one part of the board policy decisions at the bottom, are not going to close a $146 million gap. As much as I am completely in favor of some bold ideas, and for the public's knowledge, the board has already asked to see analysis of what a zone concept would look like, how it could be structured, what that might do to revenue and fare and things like that. The preventive maintenance transfer is certainly a possibility for us to increase to be proportional. But I do think when you get too far into that, you start raising concerns about your capital program and how we're spending capital money. And then the last bucket is increased current subsidy. And of course, as we all know, there's a 3% cap on increasing current subsidy. It's mentioned in the presentation that we could look at going from 3% to 5%, and that would generate $24 million. That in and of itself would be a major political lift that probably wouldn't be worth it for that $24 million. Longer term, I agree with everybody's comments. We have to really rethink how this whole operation is funded and how this works. But I kind of feel like the message that's come out on this year's budget is we're going to be okay. We've got problems looming. And I just want to caution that I think we still have hard choices that we may have to make about service and about personnel and about potential cuts. I don't think this is going to solve itself. It's not as big a gap as it could have been and we were concerned about, but it's still a pretty sizable gap. And most of the things that we're talking about are not necessarily going to close it. And so we could be in a position of having to make some difficult and hard choices in the future that aren't going to be popular, and we're not going to receive input from anyone to do some of those things. So I don't want to end on a negative note, but I want to put that on the table to make sure it's also a realistic message that's coming out of this meeting. I don't know, Randy, if you want to comment on that at all.
Well, Chair, I think I wouldn't call that negative. I think that's being pragmatic and correct. So if you look at the boxes of fare and service optimization, so my mic just went weird on that. Thank you. Is that better? Okay. Oh, thank you, Chair. Let's turn it up. So on the board policy decision box where it says fare and service optimization, I think you hit the nail on the head again there, where there's no silver bullet that fare and service is going to close the gap. If anything, we might have some fare and service proposals that widen the gap. When I'm around the region, people want more service, not less. I have yet to meet anyone that wants less bus and train service in the region. And people want night service and on and on. So again, but how to optimize our infrastructure should be very important. We have a very expensive multi-generational investment, and we should try to get every ounce of operational benefit out of that infrastructure. So yes, on fare and service. On the preventive maintenance, I think Director Klein, hit the right note there, which is per percentage, if we use the increase in IIJ funding, we are probably actually in good shape to stay at the level we need to be, and we're lucky that the Congress and the administration passed the IIJA to provide that kind of optionality around that bucket. The current subsidy, quite frankly, maybe some jurisdictions might be interested in that versus everyone related to parts that are in the bucket of fare and service optimization. One jurisdiction may say, we're really interested in night bus as an example, and we're willing to pay a little bit more for that, and here's why. And other jurisdictions might say, that's great, because that works for them, and we're not interested in that piece. And, I think I think Director Lowe said the best. We can do this as a region. We can figure this out. Lots of smart people, arguably the smartest place on planet Earth. We can figure this out, and I appreciate the board's support. And Director Durham, you said the staff is trying to be creative to give you optionality early. And I think the more open and transparent we all are with that process, we'll end up in a better place. But yeah, this is not just, hey, let's all celebrate. We only have a $200 million deficit. It is good news that it's not 500, but we still have difficult work to do. And then the real work will have to begin in earnest, if not parallel, to how to solve our long-term, kind of just the entire model of Metro.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Anything else pressing on this? If not, then, with no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned, and I'll turn the floor over to Chair Smedberg for the Board of Directors meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Before we begin the board meeting, we are going to take a 5-minute break. We will be back. We'll start promptly in 5 minutes. everyone. I'm Paul Smedberg, Chair of the WMATA Board. Thank you for being here today for our Board of Directors meeting. Since we just called the roll at the beginning of the previous meeting, we'll move right into the next agenda item. That agenda item is approval of the agenda. If there are no objections, I'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Does anyone have any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as amended. Next item is approval of the minutes. We have 4 sets of minutes for approval. The board meetings from July 28th and September 8th, 2022, and executive sessions July 28th and September 8th, 2022. I'd like to consider these minutes approved as presented. Does anyone have any comments or objections to any of those sets of minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Thank you. Next, we'll move to the employee spotlight. Today, we're recognizing 2 Metro employees for their quick thinking and brave actions in separate circumstances. Please hold your applause until the end so we can recognize both employees together. First, we'll begin with train operator Fonda Moore. Ms. Moore, please stand. And good morning. Earlier this month, Ms. Moore was operating an Orange Line train when she received reports of a fire on board one of the rail cars. After immediately securing her train at Eastern Market, she grabbed a fire extinguisher and proceeded to put out the fire on her own, as many customers were safely evacuating the platform. Thanks to Ms. Moore's fast response, the fire was contained and the resulting smoke in the station was limited. With the fire safety handled, she spoke shortly after with the MTPD officers who had quickly responded to the scene as well. They later determined that a customer had intentionally set fire to a seat cushion on the train. Later that day, General Manager Clark tweeted safety footage of Ms. Moore's heroic response, putting out the fire. His post generated countless praise from Metro customers and others in the community. Multiple commenters called her a hero, which she is, and praised her perfect response to evacuating the train, locating the extinguisher, and putting out the fire. She put her extensive safety training to good use and helped prevent what would otherwise have been a much more dire situation. Now we'll turn to Mr. Whitaker, Mr. Alan Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, please stand. Good morning. A 3-year bus operator, Mr. Whitaker works out of the Shepherd Parkway Bus Garage. Last month, he was operating the 90 bus when he witnessed a gray sedan that had been in a collision at the corner of New York Avenue and Florida Avenue, 2 very busy streets. The vehicle had flipped upside down, trapping the unconscious driver inside. Exercising swift thinking, quick reflexes, and knowledge from his safety trainings, Mr. Whitaker sprang into action. After securing the bus, he rushed to the scene and safely removed the unconscious driver from the vehicle, which was leaking gasoline. Once emergency personnel arrived, Mr. Allen returned to his bus and continued the route as it was just a his normal day's work. We all know Mr. Allen's actions were extraordinary, not just as a normal business day or normal day's work, and so did the managers at his bus garage. Shortly after the incident, he received the recognition he deserves in front of his peers at one of Metro's employee town halls. We are fortunate to have employees like Ms. Moore and Mr. Whitaker here with us today, ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. I'd like to ask our honorees to please join me and the general manager at the front of the room so we can recognize you both with quick reactions on your heroic responses.
Okay, all eyes here. 1, 2, 3. 1, yes. 1, 2, 3. Oh, they took theirs. Thank you. That one right there. Yeah, that one. That one. Is that? Yeah, that one right there. That one.
Unlock, you made that.
No, you gotta unlock it.
That one goes
what
on
he
the blue
has.
folder.
Sometimes you can just push the camera
Oh,
without
it's
unlocking.
unlocked?
Okay.
Opposing?
Yeah. 1, 2. One more.
Great job.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's great. Okay, now we'll move to public comment and reports from our advisory boards. I've been advised we do not have any public comment in person, but we do have some online. Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Board. We have a couple of comments for today. First one from William Barrett from Arlington County, Virginia. I wish you would do more to stop and punish fare evasion. I regularly see people calmly squeezing through the gates at the metro stations while the station manager ignores them. This morning I saw 2 fare evaders in the space of 20 seconds as I was entering Boston Station. The station manager was chatting with another metro employee about 20 feet away from the gates and did nothing. In the time of budget crisis, I am angry that fare and taxes I pay are subsidizing brazen thieves.
Our next comment is from Gabriel Allison of Fairfax County. Fare evasion on Metro Rail and Metrobus. Take this seriously. WMATA studies say fare evasion on Metro Rail is in the low single digits. Just anecdotally, I would say that it's 10 times that. Fare evasion is not just about lost revenue. It creates an environment of lawlessness and also results in Metro being used for non-transportation purposes. Frankly speaking, it is also demoralizing to paying customers. I constantly watch the riders in front of me jump the turnstile as I pay my fare. I feel like a sucker for subsidizing their ride. I am sure other law-abiding riders feel the same. I urge you to take this matter seriously and at the very least start a communication campaign that fare evasion won't be tolerated and can result in high fines. Many years ago, when I was a young man, I lived in Madrid, Spain, and was caught evading the metro fare by a police officer who was standing by the turnstile. I was fined 50 euros. I never attempted to jump a turnstile again in my life. Those who will criticize enforcement of fares on public transit as counter to social justice movements couldn't be more incorrect. Safe and fair transit is what all communities deserve. As long as reduced fare ridership programs exist for low-income riders, those arguments have no merit. A concerned WMATA rider of 3 decades.
Our next set is from Tacky Bordeaux of Alexandria, Virginia. I keep reading that Metro is losing money, that there isn't enough money, yet all the lights are on during the day at all above ground metro stations when there is really no need. What is more disturbing is that lights outside by the bus stops are also on in broad daylight. In Europe, because of the energy crunch, governments have taken measures to reduce consumption. No public monument is illuminated in the dark anymore. Same with business windows. Why is Metro not turning off the lights during the day?
Our final public comment is from Dalila Mercedes of Prince George's County, Maryland. I have been complaining about the T14 bus since before the 5 stations on the Orange Line closed for maintenance. I don't know why this bus route is the only route that you have to wait for at least 20 minutes or more when it feels like coming. This route gets no attention whatsoever, and I think it's because there are more foreigners on this line and they do not know where to complain and how, because they do not know their rights nor the language. This route is the same or shorter length than the T18, and we manage to see 3 to 5 T18 buses before we see a T14 come to New Carrollton Station in the afternoons, which is so frustrating and ridiculous. I was told for us to come to a meeting to give our opinion about the frequency of the buses, but of course, that can't happen because these meetings do not have translators to translate to the rider about how the buses, especially the T14, operate, nor do we have vehicles to go to this meeting, which through the internet would be perfect, but most of them aren't computer literate. I have given so many complaints about the frequency of the T14 to the New Carrollton Station that I know they must know me personally, but again, no one cares because I have yet to get a call back. That's if they call riders. All I know is the ridership is supposed to increase when, all I know is how is the ridership supposed to increase when the service is so bad on this route. Ms. Mercedes has another page of comments. She noted that she tried calling when the scheduled bus was late and that she did not get an answer to her question, and repeated some of her additional concerns about schedule adherence and other issues with the bus. That's our last comment for the day.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who submitted comments, and I'm sure the general manager and the appropriate staff will look into Ms. Mercedes' comments there. Next, we'll hear from our Accessibility Advisory Committee. Philip, good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Yeah, still morning.
Yes, and
barely.
very successful in the HCC. It's my pleasure to present the AAC report for the months of August and September. I'm a little sad because this will be my last report as chair and member of the AAC. The AAC did not meet in August, but has followed the continued work on the Orange Line stations and the reports and plans for new fare gates, tunnel and track work on the green and yellow lines, and members who have been traveling during the summer have been taking pictures and looking at other transit systems across North America and Europe. Chair Smedberg and Ms. Impastato met with the AAC on September 6th, and we had a good discussion about orange and green line, yellow line work plans, as well as fare policy, and the AAC site visit to 2 Silver Line 2 stations in safety. Mr. Clark and his senior staff met with the Metro Access Subcommittee on September 19th for a rich discussion of issues, including safety, service, fares, and sustainability. Since 2004, the disability community has benefited from the vision and work of several WMATA boards and 8 full or acting general managers before Mr. Clark, as well as the WMATA staff. Our current AAC membership is primed to continue working with staff and on issues of safety, accessibility, and sustainability. The continuing senior members of the AAC will continue to use the extended transit and WMATA experiences to work with staff to continue the progress on current rail projects, Silver Line, Orange, green and yellow lines. as well as the intercar barriers being set up for the current 7000 series lines, and also development of major accessibility issues for the new 8000 cars as they continue to develop using lessons learned. In addition, several of us have contributed to the bus transformation project and look forward to helping as we can with implementation of the bus redesign, as well as wayfinding and real-time GPS for bus, rail, and metro access. Thank you for all that WMATA does for the disability community. And I will miss coming to meetings, but I will follow you from the ether. Thank you so much.
Well, I have no doubt you'll be following us, Philip, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you. So are you being termed, or what's happening?
Well, actually, being old retired people, we're going back to Florida. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, living in Arlington has been difficult, and the healthcare in a small town in Florida. Since I'm on the faculty at the medical school there, I get pretty good healthcare. So we will be moving back to Florida and reversing our snowbird, coming back to Arlington, which we dearly will miss once health things get fixed.
So
But for now,
when do you actually take off? Are you going to be around for our next meeting? You'll be here in a couple of weeks?
well, I can't physically be there. I'm currently in Florida, which is why I'm calling in. My wife is in Arlington, arranging for returning our Comcast equipment and putting the condominium on the market. But we will miss living across the street from the Virginia Square Metro stop, one street away from the Wilson Boulevard 40 and 42 lines that go all the way through Arlington and across the river to the district, and also one street away from Washington Boulevard Metro lines that go to Farragut Square. So we will truly miss that.
Well, we will miss you, Phil, and it's been really great working with you. And,
thank you. And the team is great. Yeah, I will. Yeah.
And collaboratively with staff. Yeah.
Yes, and the team that is still there, Pat Sheehan, who is the former chair of the committee, Denise Rush, who is the vice chair of the committee and of our Metro Access Subcommittee, Tino Calabia, and Steve Caffin, both of whom travel the world. Steve has actually written several books about bus transportation from Moscow to Portugal, from New York to California, and California to Australia and Japan, are still here. And they have done most of the work. I just tell everybody what they've done. They should get a lot of credit, and they'll still be here, and they're primed to continue doing it. Okay. So thank you all. I leave the place in good hands.
All right, Phil. Yeah, you. All right, well, keep the next meeting on your calendar just in case. So.
It
all
is.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Now we'll hear from the Riders Advisory Council, Mr. Mayor. Ryan, good morning. Or good afternoon. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Chairman Smedberg, fellow members of the board, General Manager Clark, thank you for having me. We had our September meeting on the first Wednesday of the month as usual, and it was a pleasure to be able to have Randy Clark, as well as several members of his team, come speak to us and give us updates on things that are happening within WMATA. This was actually our first in-person meeting since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in March of 2020. So it was good to see everyone in person and be able to come here to our headquarters and and take advantage of this great space. Again, I'd just like to thank you very much, Randy, for coming and having a very thoughtful discussion with the Riders Advisory Council members, as well as, again, your staff. We talked about various ways in which we can help and work closely to address some of the more pressing issues that our system is experiencing, whether it be ongoing capital projects, various fare policies, more communications. It was a very robust discussion. I'm also looking forward to close communication with our COO, Brian Dwyer, and his staff to learn more about some of the operational challenges that we are experiencing and will experience moving forward. It was also a pleasure meeting and talking with the interim Senior Vice President for Community Service, Communications, and Marketing, Robert Moulton, to get a more robust insight as to kind of Metro customer attitudes and satisfaction, so the RAC can be more informed when making potential recommendations. As is, I have my little survey that I need to make sure I submit, but I did fill it out. So, on another note, also at our September meeting, we had our RAC leadership elections, and where we elected a chair and 2 vice chairs, and I'm very honored that the members of the Riders Advisory Council selected me to serve another term as their chairperson, and so I'm very thankful and humbled by that decision. But we also did elect 2 new vice chairs from our Maryland vice chair, Mihaela Fernando, and our DC vice chair, Cole Stout. And so we're really looking forward to working as an executive committee with staff and the board to kind of further the interests and the advocacy of the Riders Advisory Council. On another note, we also talked ever so briefly about the blue and yellow line shutdown, and we're happy to hear that that is obviously underway and that it is going smoothly. Obviously not perfect, but it's a huge project that takes a long time. So we understand any hiccups that may exist, and we're just looking forward to Metro continuing with its monitoring the service and communicating any changes. On another note, I'd also like to I actually was able to talk to Alan and Fonda for about 20 minutes outside, I think during the Finance and Capital Committee, and it was an absolute pleasure. And I think it goes without saying that this system is able to function and thrive and support its riders because of employees like those 2. So it was absolutely great being able to kind of pick their thoughts, and it's nice that they got the recognition that they so well deserved. And that is all the updates I have. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but otherwise, thank you.
Thank you, and Brian, congratulations on your reappointment. Any questions or comments for Mr. Mayor? Okay, thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. So that concludes our advisory committee reports. Now we'll move on to the report by the chair. First, I want to start by thanking Metro staff for their work on the blue and yellow line construction and our customers for their patience during this shutdown. This critical work will rehabilitate the yellow line tunnel and bridge between Pentagon and LaFont Plaza's stations and connect the new Potomac Yard station to the main line rail system. The Yellow Line tunnel and bridge construction date back to Metro's original construction and are nearing the end of their useful life expectancy. From what I'm seeing and hearing from numerous folks, the customer communications before and during the shutdown have been clear and proactive, and people have very much appreciated the approach we've taken this time. Further, the travel alternatives seem to be meeting customer needs. I also want to thank our jurisdictional partners in Virginia for the tremendous level of coordination that is taking on, due in large part to them. We look forward to reopening next year, ensuring that both the bridge and tunnel structures continue to function safely for years to come. Next, I'd like to highlight this year's budget process. As we have noticed from this morning's discussion, we are beginning bringing much more transparency to these budget discussions. We started with numerous options on the table in September versus waiting until the GM presents his budget in November. As my colleague and Finance Chair, Mr. Letourneau, noted, this is the beginning of the process. While we refine options over the next few months, we will also be coming to our customers and stakeholders along the way for the input and feedback. And several board members have highlighted the importance of that here today. We hope that that you'll all take part in helping us shape Metro's budget. And finally, Metro is celebrating National Hispanic Heritage Month, which runs from September 15th to October 15th. This is where we recognize the contributions and influence of Hispanic Americans to the history, culture, and achievements of the United States. During this month, Metro will be highlighting numerous Hispanic colleagues and how they experience their personal history and identity in their professional life here at Metro. Building awareness of what Hispanic Heritage Month is, educating employees on the opportunities and successes that come from cultural diversity, and advocating for an inclusive culture will continue to strengthen our Metro team. So I want to thank you all for all of that work. This concludes my report. Now I'll turn the floor over to the GM for his report. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate your comments, and thank you, Board, for all of your care for Metro and moving the agenda forward. So today I have, I would say, a blend of some really good news, quite frankly. We have a lot of things going well here at Metro, and I'm going to take the opportunity to talk through a few of those. And then at the end of my time for the General Manager report, I'm going to ask our Deputy Chief Safety Officer, Jamie Johnson, to give an update on our 7K railcar series, both the investigation and return to service. I made a commitment to this, to you all, the board and the public, that transparency is fundamental to everything we do, and I want to make sure that we can provide as much clarity to the public on the 7K topic. There's been a lot about it, obviously, for almost up to a year since the derailment, and I think it's really important to separate between the investigation and the return to service plan and make it crystal clear to all of our customers and community what we are doing every day to deliver safe service. So let's start with Chair told me not to bring it too close, so I was following go up, but that they're looking for, and that's safe, dependable, frequent service. I have a lot of mic issues here today. My wife running this, and she doesn't want me to talk. Well, we'll start again. More people are getting onto Metro, and obviously that means we have to provide the safe, frequent, reliable service that they need and expect. So you'll see on the slide, from a 14-day ridership levels are increasing both on bus and the rail side compared to August. So bus ridership is up 18%. And rail ridership is up 10% during that time. So we also know and believe the ridership would increase even more if we could deliver more frequent service that we hear every day from our customers. And trust me, I hear it every day, just on social media alone, how much people are looking for more frequency. So over that last 60 days, and it's hard to believe I've actually been here for just over 2 months, the team and I have been out listening nonstop to customers on trains and buses, meet the team events, which some of you have the opportunity to join. We were with the RAC, the AAC. We've had numerous town halls, both in this room, and lots of bus garages and rail maintenance facilities at different shifts and different times of the day. We are doing everything we can to engage as many people in the process so we can hear how everyone wants to make your Metro better. And we are purposely leaning into the concept of your Metro because we believe internally as employees, we want everyone to believe in that. And from the community point of view, we want to really make the community your asset. And we have the privilege of working here and running your system, but it truly is your Metro. We also have met, I think it's fair to say, with numerous elected officials. I knew there was a lot of elected officials in the region, but I didn't fully appreciate it until I think I had this role, how many elected officials there are in the region. But I appreciate having the opportunity to collaborate and have meetings with them all. As I mentioned earlier, what so excites me, or as board member Drummond may like, inspires me is to a person, everyone believes in Metro, and they all want it to be fantastic for this region and know the importance of it for the region. So it is great to hear that. But people have also mentioned some topics that we have to work on. And those aren't the long-term things, they're the tactical things. So at the start, people want more reliable and frequent service. Just like the team mentioned on the bus network redesign project, they feel that way on bus, they feel that way on Metro Access, and they feel that way on rail. We are laser focused on that topic. I know our COO every day is focused on that. Our Senior Vice President of Bus was out riding the bus at rush hour on multiple lines this week. I'm on the service every day. We are working really, really hard on that. And in a second, I'll talk a little bit about on the rail side, specifically with 7Ks on that. People also are concerned about public safety. And we'll talk a little bit about the work we're doing there. Cleaning, people want the Silver Line open. Lynn's here, and we're getting closer to that up by the day. Potomac Yards as well. And then, of course, people want to talk a little bit about the budget and future financial planning, which I think we just had a great conversation about that. Lastly, we're grounding everyone on the strategic transformation plan. How do we create a North Star for the organization and move us all forward? So that's kind of what we're looking at. So I want to thank the 2,000 plus customers who completed the strategic transformation plan survey. When we have all the survey tabulated and the analysis done, again, leading into transparency, we are going to publish that survey and show all the things people like about Metro and all the things people don't like about Metro and where we can improve. We go to the next slide, please. I want to highlight that starting on September 12th, we were able to ramp up service with our 7000 series vehicles. Now, we are still not where we want on frequency, and I know customers are not happy yet where we are with frequency. We are able to provide a service of about 10 minutes or less for most customers on the system because of the way we interline or overlap rail routes, but there's still work to be done there, and we're working on that every single day. Customers also, I think, have talked about communication, the idea that we are more responsive. So one of the things we started in September, at the end of August, was more rapid social media engagement and call center activity on longer days and on the weekends. And I think that has actually been very well received by our customers in the community. And it's actually helped when we've unfortunately had some incidents so we could actually do really good customer service. Another part, you know, especially as a customer every day, we want people to have access to information so they can make decisions about their own life, right? We want people to know what the service quality is. So you'll see at Metro Center, we have a new screen at the street level, right? Wouldn't it be great to know the status of trains before you go down the escalator? We're getting a lot of feedback, which is, yes, more, please. We're piloting it, which means everyone wants them. But I think this is important because we need to show the interface between bus service, rail service, public service announcements, upcoming community engagement, and really how the whole system works. So we're going to be really working heavily on our digital communication program as well. If we go to the next slide, please. So on the safety and security point of view, you'll see I was actually had the opportunity to be out on the bikes with several of our officers 2 weeks ago. And both the COO and I have been out with the officers a lot. A, to understand their day-to-day, and B, to see the interaction with customers and the employees. So we have a lot of employees that want to see more safety and security on the system. They feel they want more police presence, and they want to know that they're safe at work. Customers want to feel that same way. I think overall, everyone realizes this is a very safe system, but if we're going to be deeply honest, we have a societal issue that our norms and how we've acted as a society have kind of broken down a little bit over the last couple of years. So this isn't a Metro topic. Metro happens to be part of the fabric of a larger community. And so lots of parts of our government in the region are working on, you know, how to stem gun violence, how to get people help when they need it. We have significant mental health and issues both, you know, across the country. So we are doing our part. So one of the things we're doing is enhance police visibility in the system. So I really appreciate the chief and his command staff. They've redeployed and rethought and reimagined all about police deployment. You're going to see more officers on trains. You might see an officer get on a train. We have some lighting issues that we want to have the best lighting we can for our customers, and some deep cleaning in parts of the system that are a little hard to get to. So under the direction of the COO, there's a 7-week program called Clean Sweeps. You probably have seen a whole bunch of stations that already look basically pristine, and we have some others that we're working on. So we're going to get more of that. Lastly, and I really appreciate Board Member Babers, you recognizing this as from the team point of view. We've just kicked off a national recruitment for our Metro's first ever Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. And I think this is really important statement. We want to have someone here at the executive leadership level that is providing that lens on everything we do, both internally and externally. how we hire and how we work with our workforce, and externally how we do service planning and fares, and how we engage with the community. So we're really looking forward to leading into that, and I appreciate multiple board members who provided input on that process. Next please. We are also doing a lot of upcoming engagement on the budget and our Better Bus process that we just walked through. We also are working through fare gate modifications. This board has made it clear, and I think we just had 2 or 3 public comments about fares. The team is working on some gate modifications. We're going to see what those look like and hopefully pilot a few of those in the system soon to make it a little more difficult to do fare evasion. And I want to especially thank board member Babers and some of our other jurisdictional partners. We will have more information next week, but we're getting closer to having a process in place to get back into doing fare enforcement across the system. So we've heard that loud and clear, and we're going to be targeting that coming up shortly. Lastly, as the chair said, I want to thank our customers that use the Yellow Line for their patience, and all of our partners, City of Alexandria, Arlington County. This has been a massive team effort, to say the least. My understanding it's the largest bus shuttle operation in the history of Metro. I think the other day we had 125 buses on various routes. That is a gigantic bus shuttle. I've heard that we've had a couple problems, but overall, what I've heard is, hey, this is a lot better than the first Safe Track shutdown, which means that's we're a learning organization, and it is willingness to understand what's wrong and fix it. So thanks to the chair that was out with me helping customers last Monday when we kicked off the bus shuttle, and I welcome you all if you'd like to get out at any time to be out with us as well. So lastly, it's the Advancing Historical Capital Program, and I just want to really double down, and I know customers get frustrated with some of these shutdowns or large maintenance programs, but they are designed to make this Metro here for generations to come. So our Silver Line work is getting close, and I think Lynn will mention we're close to seeking safety certification on that by the end of October. Potomac Yard Station, I know the chair particularly is very interested in that station, not that everyone isn't, but there's a lot of work going in there, and Andy and his team are working around the clock on the tie-in for that project. I want to thank Board Member Lowe, who was out with Senator Van Hollen celebrating the Orange Line. I guess that'd be 2 Fridays ago. Great project to get those stations. I mean, if you haven't been out, they look like brand new stations. And the staff did an incredible job. And the stuff you don't see is actually the elevated structure and all these other components that this railroad will be good for decades to come. And of course, the Yellow Line project that we've talked about earlier. So with all that said, I just want to take the opportunity to really sincerely thank the staff. And I've been here 8 weeks. I've been pushing the staff pretty hard, but they've been incredibly responsive. And I believe, Board Member, you'll like the word, I'm inspired by their dedication and loyalty to this, not just this organization, to the region and the idea of service. So I thank all of our staff for all their hard work, and get back to you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Are there any questions or comments for the General Manager? No, and I appreciate the comprehensive.
I'm handing it over to Jamie as soon as there's no questions.
Oh, you want to do it now? Yeah. Okay.
I just want to make sure there's no questions. Chair, thank you. So with that, I want to highlight Jamie Johnson. I think some of you know Jamie. He is our Deputy Chief Safety Officer. Our Chief Safety Officer is enjoying a vacation, and good for her. But Jamie is here. Jamie is also our lead at Metro on the NTSB investigation for the 7000 series trains. And Jamie, why don't you please update the board, and obviously through the board, the whole community, what we are doing both for 7Ks, both from investigation point of view and on the return to service. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Chair, members of the board, good afternoon. The other part of my role, which is really important to recognize, is the fact that I'm also responsible for safety oversight. So I have a direct link with the investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, but I also oversee the return to service plan in the sense that I'm ensuring, and my team's ensuring, that it's safe. So thank you for the opportunity to update you today on the 7000 series, and particularly respond to some comments that the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission, the WMSC, made earlier in the week. As the GM said, we want to be absolutely transparent, both on the ongoing investigation, but also the return to service plan for the 7000 series fleet. So our customers trust their Metro system as well as acknowledge where Metro is continuously improving. First, I will address the NTSB investigation, which is one process, and I'll follow that with some comments on the return to service plan. Firstly, I want the board to know that I conferred with the lead investigator from the NTSB before offering this information in public, as every party to the investigation is required to do. In its public meeting on Tuesday, WMSC referenced a consultant report commissioned by Metro in 2015, and I just want to be clear that this report was not new information that we were hiding, and it was actually provided to the investigation back in November. So this isn't new information, and there's nothing that we've been hiding here. Review and consideration of this report's content, along with other forensic analyses employed to connect all the dots in the investigation, have been the subject of NTSB's investigation for nearly a year now, as we all know. During that time, it's important to acknowledge that neither the NTSB nor the WMSC have issued a single directive to Metro to change any aspect of our wheel sets or track configuration. This is because the root cause remains unknown. If hazards were to be identified at any time during the investigation, the NTSB have assured me that they can issue urgent and early recommendations, and no such recommendations have been made to date. Again, the reason for that is because the root cause is not yet known. WMATA is ready to make any and all necessary changes that are identified through this process. Now to turn to our return to service plan for the 7000 series. We agree with what WMSC stated on Tuesday, I quote, "Available information continues to suggest there are multiple contributing factors to the wheel migration on the 7000 series," end quote. We concur with this position, but changing too many variables at the same time may prevent us from properly evaluating the data that we're collecting for the investigation. But we must not conflate, as the General Manager referenced, the investigation with the safe return of cars to service. Rather than draw conclusions before experts identify the root cause, WMATA is focusing on refining our processes to operate a safe rail system, designing the most robust back-to-back measurement process in the industry to keep our trains safe. WMATA is confident we are measuring the 7000 series for back-to-back more often and with a high level of precision with a digital dial gauge when compared to other agencies. WMATA is treading carefully. Changing track or other engineering solutions based on partial theories that are not wholly supported by data or evidence might not only fail to address the issue, but might cause unintended consequences in other areas. The current wheel measurement program, which allows Metro to return up to 20 7000 series trains to service, was approved by WMSC on September the 2nd and includes continued monitoring of track conditions. We are committed to conducting measurements until the root cause is identified through the NTSB process. So really a message that I would like you to hear is that it's about measurement, measurement, measurement. We must measure regardless of whether we get to a root cause. That will be our approach. Today, we are limited to 275 cars based on press tonnage criteria, and that's the amount of force that are used upon when those wheels are manufactured to press the wheels onto the axles. There is a caveat, though, with press tonnage, this criteria. Metro has found 16 non-conforming axles that were actually pressed at the higher specification, which is 30% of all the failures. Because these axles did not conform, we cannot consider the higher press tonnage to be a magic wand. We are therefore gathering more data and working with WMSC as to how to safely expand the fleet in the next phase. This extra data will be drawn from the 1.5 million miles run, 1.5 million miles run since the cars returned to service in June, and 53,000 back-to-back measurements that have been taken since then. Of note, restraining rail was mentioned by WMSC on Tuesday. Restraining rail or guardrail are utilized to distribute the lateral force generated as a train traverses a curve. So it's extra piece of rail that you put next to the curve when a train is moving between tracks or on a curve. So that makes sense as a concept because that's the point in which contact with the back of the wheel might occur in the system. While restraining rail is a logical factor to consider, as I've just described, we must emphasize that there is currently no direct link to the restraining rail in the investigation. It's on the table to examine, without question, as the NTSB investigation continues to dig in further, considering all the possible factors. But most importantly, our approach of robust measurements has been successful to date. Not a single wheel migration has been found since June the 6th, beg your pardon, when we started this measurement program. We at Momata, and specifically me and my colleagues in the safety department, which oversees operations and partners with internal quality assurance and operating teams, continue to be confident that we have the right system in place to effectively mitigate the situation, and are confident our staff is perfecting these systems and generally performing them well. But to ensure transparency with the board and the public, we did have an issue this morning. We had an unintended release of 6 rail cars that were due for measurement. The management and oversight systems caught this, and the cars were removed from service. Given the results of the measurement program, we will work with WMSC to return the entire fleet under a continued program of wheel measurement to ensure a safe fleet for customers in the region. And it's worth noting, before I take your questions, I want to remind the board that our customers know this well, that since we introduced them into service, the 7Ks have proven nearly 4 times less likely to be removed from service than older cars. And they are safer than other cars in the fleet in terms of crashworthiness and other factors like interior safety design and cameras, etc. We should not rush to judgment, but rather continue and grow these measurements for as long as necessary to mitigate risk and safely serve the public. And those are the end of my comments. Obviously happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. To your last point, though, I want to make sure that most recent thing that happened this morning, just because the cars were pulled doesn't mean they were unsafe. And it seems like your process caught it quickly and took the cars out so they could be properly measured.
So a breach in procedure is obviously something my team takes seriously. Right. However, there's always the assessment of the hazard and the assessment of the risk. Right. In this case, the trains weren't unsafe. It's just that we had a procedural escape. That's the term I would use. But we're investigating that and taking it very seriously. But it was safe for passengers.
But it was caught
absolutely
rather quickly.
Yeah.
As part of that end process. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank
you for the clarification.
Yeah. And Jamie, thank you very much for that comprehensive and thorough, presentation on a very complicated issue. I think the thing that concerned me the most, and something that you said early on in your presentation, and things that were out in the media that conflated the two issues. That there was some confusion there, and and when I first read it as well, I was a little concerned about that those two issues would have been conflated like that. Could you go into a little bit more about that? Why it's important to separate those two, just so we're clear with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because of the complexity, it's become very clear, and I think many people know the problem is complex, and there's no obvious root cause at this time. And so the investigation, there's a real risk that we might not find a root cause. That would be extremely disappointing. However, really what we can be focused on as a service is the mitigation. And the mitigation is just as important, because, what we've selected to do is to, as I said, measure. Because we feel that we've set very conservative intervals for our measurements. So we're doing them at 4 days currently. We believe that that's including a 60% factor of safety. And if we are cautious and implement as we've agreed with the WMSC, we're very confident that will provide the data to then move to the next stage, which is to use that same approach, but to introduce the entire fleet.
And thank you for that. And, I think it's really important that you and your team and Teresa and others are really staying focused on those important facts and not being distracted by things that are out there that aren't necessarily accurate. And I think that's a real concern with this. And, you know, all parties have to be responsible. So appreciate your presentation and your forward addressing these issues head on. So any other comments or questions, Dr. Lowe?
I'm glad we're taking the time to do this. I have some things I'm still confused about and need to get clarity on. This 2015 report was prepared by a consultant. I need to get total clarity about who provided the 2015 report to the NTSB and or the WMSC. Did the consultant provide that report, or did WMATA provide that report?
So I provided the report. It's a WMATA document.
Okay.
And because it's given to us back in 2015, I provided it on November the 10th.
Okay, so this isn't new.
No, this information isn't new. The issues raised by that report have always been on the table for discussion, have indeed been discussed at length, and those issues are on the NTSB's radar when it comes to what do we need to consider, what do we need to address. That's correct.
Okay, but I'm just finding out about it because all of the material that's related to the NTSB investigation, it can't be released until the NTSB gives permission for it to be released.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm treading quite carefully in this conversation but you're absolutely right, I agree.
Okay. In the bigger picture regarding, that's all I need to know about the NTSB investigation, except that it's ongoing. On the separate topic of return to service, we just heard in a previous presentation that ridership is up. And I will say, like, I personally, as a rider, I'm definitely seeing that that's the case. And to the point where I'm starting to get concerned about crowding. I've been in some really, really packed rail cars lately, and it seems to me like there's multiple potential sources of risk and potential sources of safety concerns out there in the system. I think I want to know kind of where we're at on rail capacity and if we're starting to see an increase in risk from capacity issues.
So I work very closely in my oversight role with Brian Dwyer, the Chief Operating Officer, and his colleagues to monitor multiple risks. And one of those, since Labor Day, that has started we've noticed an uptick in ridership. So as a system, we are not overcrowded at this moment. However, there is data that I've been seeing over the last couple of weeks, specifically on the red line, at certain times during rush hour, where those figures of number of customers in the rail car has grabbed my attention. And I would say there is a growing risk there of overcrowding. So what does that mean? There are various ways to tackle that. But what I'm thinking in my position is, okay, so we're trying to balance the risk of the root cause with the mitigation with the 7Ks, with other emerging risks in the system like overcrowding. And so we have to work with the WMSC to explain those risks so the right decisions are made to keep the customers safe. I hope that's enough specifics there.
Yeah, actually, I mean, now that you mention it, I do ride the red line during rush hour. So yeah, okay, so it's great to know that you are already aware of that. And yeah, I think that that's what needs to go to the WMSC. So thank you for working on that.
Deputy Mayor Babers.
Thank you, Jamie, so much. Especially, I now see clearly that the NTSB investigation is totally separate from the return to service plan. And I think that based on things I have read, I thought that they should be put together and they should be viewed together. So that's very good. I correctly just stated that, right?
That's correct. Obviously, there's a crossover to a degree, but I think it's very different. There's the investigation of the root cause and then the mitigation. It's very different.
Okay, so I do have one question. So you're saying that since June, we have taken 53,000 measurements, every 7,000 series train, every 4 days is being inspected for the wheel measurement, correct?
That's not quite correct.
Oh, okay.
There's only 275 7,000 series rail cars that are eligible for measurement and use. And that's because of that press tonnage criteria that has been agreed with WMSC, that only those in the higher press tonnage, 275 cars, are eligible for measurement at this stage. But the plan is to learn from that and then to expand.
Okay, great, and thanks for that. Thanks for that clarity. But even with the 275 cars every 4 days being measured, we have found no non-conforming wheels.
Correct.
And I'm not a safety expert, but even with that, we haven't tried to go back to anyone to say, you know, we believe that we can stretch that out to 8 days, every 8 days. We are still saying we're going to keep doing that every 4 days, or are we considering something different?
We're considering many different options, and it's part of the conversation with WMSC to prove to them, to demonstrate to them what is safe and what isn't. So it's part of an ongoing conversation.
Okay. Well, no, that's...
4 days is really not where, from a safety perspective, we think we could land. We think it's very conservative and very safe at this stage while we're still learning, but there are options, in our opinion, that we can expand that interval.
Right. And is that standard, to your knowledge, in any other rail service, New York, Chicago, that they're doing inspections like these so frequently?
The back-to-back inspections, we've obviously done a lot of research as part of the investigation. There's no one inspecting as often as we are currently. However, many agencies do indeed inspect for back-to-back, but not as intensely as we're doing at this stage.
Okay, well, thank you, because as a rider, I ride rail and bus. It appears that I'm riding on some of the safest trains out there. So that's comforting, so thank you very much.
And just to be clear, Mr. Clark, me, Teresa, Brian Dwyer, we wouldn't be running service if it wasn't safe.
Oh, no, absolutely, but I'm just saying the level of safety
Absolutely.
boggles the mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jamie, I have one other, or maybe this should be directed to the general manager, but I'll ask you first, I guess. So we had that date of, I think it was October 23rd. So what happens if we're in this current state right now, once we hit that date? Maybe that's more of a general manager comment. In terms of service, when we open up the line.
I'm happy to take that, Jamie, because, Jamie's, again, what's really important about Jamie and Teresa's role is safety oversight, right? Not to run operations, they are actually to provide oversight on Brian and his team to do assurance. Board Member Babers, the way you said it's right, it's not just that it's safe. The level of safety assurance that we are performing is much higher than any of our peer agencies, and I think that is where hopefully the community at large will get that nuance. To your question, Chair, about when we hit October 23rd and the Yellow Line project changes from just the bridge and the tunnel and not the whole other section, my early understanding based on rail operations and scheduling and planning is we will not have enough rail cars come, I guess, October 24th, based on that part of the alignment being back up. So if we do not implement more vehicles into the fleet on October 24th, we would either, again, my understanding based on all the analysis right now is we'd either have to cut service in different parts of the network to open the Silver Line, or we'd have to keep levels of service and adjust those levels of service throughout the network and not open the Silver Line. Because we will not have enough rail cars to operate the network And that's just on today's frequency, let alone the frequency that obviously the customers are looking for and to deal with the counting issues that Board Member Lowe mentioned. So
I mean, and just to be clear, that are budgeted, the budgeted level of service.
significantly lower than the budgeted service. And I want to make that clear too. We have a lot of comments publicly about you're not running trains to make money or save money. Farthest from the truth. We are focused on delivering every trip that is budgeted for the region.
And Mr. Clark, when you say more trains, specifically the 7,000?
7,000, sir, yeah. And I want to commend the vehicle maintenance team. The work that team has done to keep the legacy fleet in operation. I mean, some of this fleet was mothballed before the incident that happened. And they've been working literally 24/7 at this organization to do the legacy fleet and this really intense safety assurance process for the 7Ks. So when it's all said and done, we need to increase the 7K fleet availability if we are not going to reduce service and let alone grow the frequency.
And I want to highlight the work that Ms. Empasato, Mr. Johnson, and other people have done to really address this issue and hopefully bring this to some, resolution. And so really, thank you for continuing this, and thank you for this presentation, Jamie, and others in this room as well, Andy and Brian, and many other folks who are working behind the scenes to do this. And to Lucinda's point, this is not an unsafe system. Obviously, these things are verified. I'm actually concerned that we have legacy vehicles out there running as much as they are.
The teams are
It
working
could arguably
really hard.
be less safe than 7,000.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that is the end of the General Manager's report.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Jim. All right, next we'll turn over to Mr. Drummer for the Safety and Operations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During our September 8th Safety and Operations Committee meeting, the staff requested approval of the annual update to Metro's Agency Safety Plan, or ASP. Once approved by the board, the ASP will be submitted to the Washington Royal Safety Commission for approval. Mr. Chair, I move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Drummer. We have a motion by Mr. Drummer. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Lowe. Are any final comments or discussions on the item? Hearing none, Ms. Ellison, please administer the vote.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Ms. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Dr. Lowe?
Aye.
Mr. Drummer?
Aye.
Ms. Martin Proctor? Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Now we'll move to the report, and thank you, Mr. Drummer. We'll move to the report by the Executive Committee. The following item was referred to the board at this morning's Executive Committee meeting: approval of the guiding principles for Better Bus Network redesign. Staff recommended adoption of the guiding principles for Better Bus Network redesign project to provide a framework for decision-making throughout the project. The guiding principles are as follows: ensure a customer-focused and regional perspective, engage and communicate authentically, inclusively, and transparently, ensure equity is a value throughout the project, allow customers' input, regions' needs, data, and service guidelines to drive decisions, attract customers with frequent, reliable, connective service, make cost-effective and data-driven business decisions. And Mr. Drummer, I note your comment earlier about the equity bullet there and being a little passive, and I think it's just sort of an underlying foundation block of this whole process, but point well taken there. So I want to move approval. Can I get a motion, please? Oh, a second. Oh, I can move it. Okay. I will move approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Lowe. We have a motion and a second. Any comment or discussions? Okay. Ms. Ellison, please administer the vote.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Ms. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Dr. Lowe?
Aye.
Mr. Drummer?
Aye.
Ms. Martin Proctor? Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Okay, now we'll move to the report by the Finance and Capital Committee. Mr. Letourneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The following item was referred to the board from this morning's Finance and Capital Committee, joint development approvals for the Greenbelt Station. Staff requested authorization to negotiate a joint development agreement with the General Services Administration for the sale of up to 40 acres of Metro property at the Greenbelt Metro Station without holding a competitive solicitation. And 2, hold a compact public hearing and conduct associated outreach on proposed changes to transit facilities at the station. Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. We have a motion by Mr. Letourneau. Is there a second? Seconded by Deputy Mayor Babers. We have a motion and a second. Any comments or discussion on this item? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Ellison, please administer the vote.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Ms. Klein? Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Dr. Lowe?
I abstain.
Mr. Drummer?
Aye.
Ms. Martin Proctor? Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. We have an administrative item before the board for discussion. Ms. Bowersox will be reviewing the process for acceptance of Phase 2 of the Silver Line in Metro's adopted regional system, the ARS. Ms. Bowersox, please begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Today marks the first day of fall, which is an important season in our march to passenger service on the Silver Line extension. Today, the board is considering a resolution that would delegate to the general manager the authority to accept the extension from the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority after we have determined that all 10 conditions have been met. This allows management to close out final items such as transferring warranties, permits, and spare parts from vendors, as well as completing testing and other systems integration. This step keeps us on track to seek safety certification concurrence from both FTA and WMSC as we have scheduled for operational preparedness next month. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bowersox. Does anyone have any questions or comments? So this is obviously a very important next step, and a lot is on the line here, so to speak, and we all have confidence in the team to bring this to its conclusion. I think it goes without saying, though, that along the way, we would very much like to be updated on how progress is being made, and to Dr. Lowe's point earlier on another topic and everything. So this is obviously very important, not only to the region, but our continued growth here and the importance of Metro to this region. So, all right. So I'll put forward a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Seconded by Mr. Letourneau. Any comments or discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Just briefly, I just wanted to be clear that we're really doing this also just to kind of speed up the process so that once the general manager knows there is a date that we can move forward, he doesn't have to wait to come back to the board to actually have us vote on it. Where this is intended to speed the process up as much as we can.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Matt. They are the experts. This is going to be an operational question. It's nice that we have input, but it's really up to the professionals and the people who really understand this stuff in detail that are going to help make that decision. So, all right. So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Ellison, please administer the vote.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Ms. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Dr. Lowe?
Aye.
Mr. Drummer?
Aye.
Ms. Martin Proctor? Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, for the consent agenda, I would like to move approval of the following item: WMATA Local 922 Retirement Plan Amendment. Staff seeks approval to amend the WMATA Local 922 International Brotherhood of Teamsters Collective Bargaining Agreement Retirement Plan. This would allow an employee who separates from WMATA and is rehired to a Local 922 covered position to repurchase their actuarial pension that was withdrawn on separation. I want to move approval of this item. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Klein. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none, Ms. Ellison, please administer the vote.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Ms. Klein? Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Dr. Lowe?
Aye.
Mr. Drummer?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Reports by the jurisdiction. NBTC, I personally don't have any report. Matt, anything update there?
No.
Yep, thank you. District of Columbia, Deputy Mayor Babers.
Yes, I'd just like to invite everyone to DC's Open Streets, which is where we block off all traffic from, it's going to be Georgia Avenue on October 1st from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. over 3 miles of street, totally blocked off. Bring your families and come have some fun.
Great. WSTC, Mr.
Nothing to
Trevor.
report from the
Thank you.
WSTC.
And federal government, Ms. Clark. All right, thank you. With no further business to come before the board, we will stand adjourned. I'd like to request that the board convene in executive session. In accordance with the bylaws, I, Paul Smedberg, request that the board of directors convene in executive session to discuss the following matter pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsection C, contractual or other matters involving confidential or proprietary concerns, or the investment of public funds where discussion in public would adversely affect the financial interest of WMATA, and G, disposition of WMATA property or acquisition of real property for WMATA purposes where discussion in public would adversely affect WMATA's negotiating or bargaining position. Can I get a second? Seconded by Dr. Lowe. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. See you upstairs, and thank you for joining us today.